Chapter 884. P.S. Yesterday, a chapter was repeated. It has been changed to Chapter 883. Readers who accidentally subscribe to the client can open the table of contents and refresh the content by clicking on the chapter name. Perhaps Titanic attracted too much popularity in the film market at once. This summer is a disaster for live-action blockbusters. The average production cost of The Fifth Element, Prison in the Sky, Godzilla, Transdimensional Contact, and Batman and Robin is $100 million, but the box office performance is worse than the previous one. The 5 blockbusters have failed one after another. People can't help but worry about James Bond, Casino Royale. As we all know, this is Eric Williams' first movie after Jurassic Park set a global box office record of $1 billion. Although in the past 4 years, Firefly Group has continuously produced The Lion King, Lone Man Day, Jurassic Park 2, Titanic, and the current Finding Nemo, and other excellent films with global box office performance, and MGM Pictures, which is secretly controlled by Eric Williams, has also gradually taken shape. However, Eric Williams has been away for 4 years after all. The growing scale of Firefly Group will definitely consume too much of his energy. In this situation where he hasn't touched the screen for 4 years and is busy with work, it's hard to imagine whether James Bond, Casino Royale, can still maintain his previous movie standards. What's more, in this summer where blockbusters gather but frequently fail, the audience may have completely lost patience with the continuous bad movies. Although the 007 series has a very stable box office appeal, this series has lasted for more than 30 years after all. The production model is old-fashioned and rigid. It's not easy to find a breakthrough. If James Bond, Casino Royale, can't surprise us on the basis of the original 007 series, it's conceivable that this first blockbuster movie in the history of 007 with a production cost of more than $100 million will usher in the same miserable end as the previous movies. On the medium-sized Boeing 767, the girl tilted her head and looked at the Los Angeles Times in Eric's hand beside him. She said unhappily, "These people are really good at talking nonsense. Why can't they see that you're the one in charge of the movies Titanic and Independence Day?" Eric put down the newspaper in his hand and switched to another one with a smile. "I think that makes sense. Furthermore, if the movie really flops, they're giving me an excuse in advance." "How considerate." "Hee hee." The girl giggled and moved closer to him. She said, "Eric, Casino Royale is so great. This is something that everyone who has watched it agrees with. You won't fail. Not now, but that doesn't mean that it won't happen in the future. Everyone will fail." "That doesn't matter," the girl said. Her small body snuggled up to him and rubbed against him. She said, "Eric, let's go to the bedroom in front. It must be very exciting to do it on the plane." Eric gestured to the light outside the porthole and said, "It's daytime now. If you're tired, go and sleep for a while. This time, you won't have a reason to complain that you're uncomfortable." The two of them were now on a medium-sized Boeing 767-200ER. This was also the largest private jet under the famous Los Angeles Airline Rental Company, ALC. Originally, it was only for group rentals. Although it had been modified, it could still carry up to 50 passengers each time. As there was a very comfortable and luxurious presidential suite in the cabin, the girl took a fancy to it and specially rented it for this cross-ocean voyage. Eric's schedule was tight. The premiere in London was tomorrow night. Most of the main cast members had already rushed to London. Eric only had time to set off today. Other than the crew members, there were less than 10 passengers on the plane. Eric, the girl, the twins, Eric's assistant, and 4 accompanying bodyguards. Hearing Eric's teasing, the girl stretched her small body comfortably. She pretended to be dissatisfied and said, "It's still too small." Eric smiled and said, "It seems that I should hang you outside the plane. There's more space there." The girl smiled and hit Eric. Seeing that Eric deliberately changed the topic and had no intention of going to the bedroom to do whatever he liked, she rolled her eyes and said, "All right, Eric, wait a minute." Before Eric could ask anything, the girl had already gotten up and left the suite. She walked to the back of the airport. Eric was a little baffled. He shrugged and leaned comfortably on the sofa as he flipped through the newspaper in his hand. About 10 minutes later, 2 tall figures quietly walked in. Eric caught a glimpse of sky blue from the corner of his eye and thought that it was the flight attendant, so he didn't pay much attention to it. However, the 2 women were in front of him in the blink of an eye. Their 4 slender and straight white thighs were intuitively dazzling. The flight attendant's dress was obviously much shorter. Looking up, the sky blue top was too tight, accentuating the curves of their breasts. There were 2 silk scarves tied around their necks. Looking up, there were 2 identical slightly blushing faces. When Eric's eyes met, the twins' expressions became a little more shy. After spending so much time together, Eric also knew that although the 2 girls had good skills, they were very conservative. Before Eric could say anything, Natasha, who was on the left, placed the tray in her hand on the coffee table in front of Eric. She bent down and asked softly, "Master, do you want coffee?" The visual stimulation was already enough to make people's blood rush to their heads. Barbie doll-like faces, white and tender long legs, coupled with the flight attendant uniform, it was already unbearable. Seeing Natasha bend down with her collar open, Eric suddenly felt that something was wrong. He sniffled, hurriedly raised his head, and hurriedly reached out to cover his nose in a panic. The Boeing 767 set off from Los Angeles at 1 o'clock in the afternoon on Wednesday. After an 11-hour flight, it landed at Heathrow Airport in the western suburbs of London. It was already 6 o'clock in the morning local time. The 007 series producers, Barbara Broccoli and Michael Wilson, who personally came to pick them up, felt that Drew was very strange. From time to time, they would hang on to Eric, as if they were thinking of something funny. They would laugh for a while without caring about their image. Occasionally, they would whisper a few words in Eric's ear. Although Eric concealed his expression very well, he still showed a little embarrassment from time to time. After exchanging greetings for a while, the Broccoli siblings gave a black Mercedes-Benz to Eric and the girl, and they drove away from the airport. The London paparazzi had obviously received the news a long time ago. Because they used the VIP channel, they could not block Eric and his group from the departure hall. However, as soon as the few cars drove out of the airport, there were people with motorcycles and cameras in their hands who were following them. The girl didn't care about the paparazzi around her. When the car drove smoothly on the road, she suddenly couldn't help but laugh a few times and threw herself on Eric softly. Glancing at the twins driving in front, the girl raised her face and gently bit Eric's ear. She said in a very dissatisfied tone, "Damn it, Eric, you have never had a nosebleed in front of me." "Well, it's been so long. I suggest we forget about this matter, okay?" "Humph, not good at all." The girl ignored the twins' blushing faces in the front seat and continued, "It's a pity. If only I brought a camera at that time. If I sold those photos to these guys outside, maybe I could make a small fortune, hee hee. Let's think about the premiere tonight. How did you invite Prince Charles?" The girl knew when to stop embarrassing Eric. She said, "I told them that if they don't want to attend the premiere, I'll invite Diana." Eric knew that the girl would definitely not do that, but he still said, that's ruthless." "Of course." The girl laughed a few times proudly. When she saw a paparazzi driving a motorcycle near the car and doing a difficult action of taking a picture of the car window, she was a little dissatisfied. She said to Natasha in the front seat, "Drive faster and shake them off. They are so annoying." Eric glanced out the window and looked at the paparazzi following them on the motorcycle. He suddenly thought of something and said, "You mean, the house you bought last time is next to Kensington Palace?" "Yes. Kensington Garden Street. You will see it later. It's a great house." The lass nodded. Suddenly, she seemed to have understood something, and said, "Diana is still living in Kensington Palace. Hee hee, Eric, if you're interested, you can go and greet her." Eric just looked at the paparazzi following them again. In his memory, Princess Diana's car accident should be in August 1997. It was almost July now. It was just that he did not know if it would happen again. Eric was not a conspiracy theorist, but he knew that there were too many dirty things in the upper class of society. After thinking about it for a while, Eric decided to ignore it. If it did not happen, then it was naturally a good thing. If it did, then it did not matter. Perhaps, like Marilyn Monroe, when a woman suddenly died at a time of peerless beauty, she could leave a legend in people's hearts. More than half an hour later, the car passed through Kensington Street in the West End of London and turned into a heavily guarded street west of Kensington Park. Naturally, the paparazzi were also blocked out of the street. Only Eric's car drove in. After passing through the green street for a while, the car entered the courtyard of a mansion. After getting out of the car in the parking lot, the girl pulled Eric and pointed to the southeast. With a mischievous expression, she said, "There, Eric, it's there." Eric knew that the girl was talking about Princess Diana's residence, but he did not care. He just looked at the white English castle-style building in front of him. Seeing that the Broccoli siblings had also gotten out of the car, several bodyguards began to unload Eric and Drew's luggage from the official car. The girl did not continue the topic. Instead, she hugged Eric's arm and asked, "Eric, how is the house?" "It's very big inside. There are a total of 12 bedrooms. The living room can accommodate 100 people at the same time. There's also a basement. It was originally used to store art, but the previous owner went bankrupt a few years ago and sold it. In the future, we can change it into a screening room. Oh, there was a team of housekeepers here. I know you don't like it, so I dismissed them. When we are not here, there will be professionals to clean and maintain the house once a week." Seeing the twins go forward to open the door of the villa, Eric said to the Broccoli siblings, "Let's go in and talk. To be honest, it's my first time here." The Broccoli siblings nodded with a smile and walked into the villa with Eric. Drew ordered the bodyguards to move several large suitcases into the living room. After a few words, he sent them and Eric's assistant away. Kensington Garden Street was full of super-rich people. The security at the entrance was very strict. It was one of the safest residences in London. There was no need for bodyguards to stay at home all the time. Eric was not used to this. If something unexpected really happened, the twins would be enough. Although the two girls looked harmless, Eric, who had personally been beaten, with the two girls, naturally knew their strength. The girl also specially sent them to receive formal security training. The two girls were not much different from formal bodyguards. The girl took the twins to pack their luggage. Eric and the Broccoli siblings sat down in the living room and talked about the arrangements for the premiere of 007 Casino Royale tonight. The premiere was planned to be held at London's Royal Albert Hall. Coincidentally, the hall was next to Kensington Park, only a few hundred meters away from Garden Street. In addition to the main creative team of 007 Casino Royale, the crew also invited some British stars and heavyweight guests such as Prince Charles. Considering that Eric and Drew had just taken a 10-hour flight and definitely needed to rest, the Broccoli siblings did not stay for too long. They simply talked about some details of the premiere and took the initiative to leave. After sending the Broccoli siblings out of the villa, Eric returned to the living room. The girl next to him blinked and said expectantly, "Eric, I'm not sleepy. How about we go out for a walk?" Although it was late at night in Los Angeles time, the girl was not tired at all because she had enough rest on the plane. Eric was actually the same, but he still said, "It may be very late tonight. You'd better go lie down first. I still have some things to do here. Peter will send something over later." Drew suddenly looked curious. "What is it?" Eric did not hide and said, "It's some manuscripts. The development of Disney's live-action movies has stagnated in recent years. I plan to select some children's books to develop, but there is nothing satisfactory about the children's books that have been published. Before I came, I asked Liz to talk to the British branch of HarperCollins. They will send some unpublished manuscripts over. I want to see if I can find some interesting stories." HarperCollins was one of the world's largest publishers of English books and was also a wholly owned subsidiary of News Corporation. Eric's purpose of doing this was naturally to find the Harry Potter series, which was once the world's most popular fantasy novel in history. In the original space-time, Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone should have already been published, but although Eric had been secretly keeping an eye on it, he had not found any trace of this book. Considering that J.K. Rowling had been rejected by a series of publishers in the past, Eric planned to first search through the manuscripts that had been rejected by the publishers. If this book was really completely fanned out, then he would have to find someone to ghostwrite it. No matter what, Eric would not give up on this series that was perfect for Disney in any way. In the original Spacetime, the copyright of this series had actually fallen into the hands of Time Warner, which was definitely Disney's biggest mistake. Chapter 886. Not long after, Peter Ritchie and the manager of the British branch of HarperCollins Publishing House delivered 4 large boxes of manuscripts. Eric chatted with the two of them for a while before sending them away. The girl walked around the 4 boxes of manuscripts and took out a simple book from one of the boxes. She opened it and said, "Eric, there are at least 100 books here. Do you plan to read them all?" Eric waved the folder that the manager of HarperCollins had left behind and said, "How could I have so much time? This is the outline of the story that they've sorted out. I'll see if there's anything that interests me first, then I'll read the entire manuscript." "Oh, then I'll read it together. Maybe there'll be something that interests me," the girl said. She got up and walked over, but she forgot to put the manuscript back. Eric ordered the twins to move the boxes of manuscripts to the study upstairs. When he saw the girl coming over to snatch the folder from his hand, he let go of his hand. However, he still took the manuscript that the girl casually stuffed into his hand. His eyes casually glanced at the cover of the manuscript, and his expression suddenly became a little more surprised, as well as an inexplicable smile. On the cover of the manuscript in his hand were 2 words clearly written, Harry Potter. Although it was different from the title of the first book in the series, J.K. Rowling's signature at the bottom of the title was definitely not wrong. For a moment, Eric almost pulled the girl's small hand over and kissed it. At the same time, he also wanted to drag her into the game to open the box. Seeing the girl holding the folder and sitting down on the sofa, eagerly flipping through it, Eric also walked over and opened the manuscript in his hand to read it seriously. By noon, Eric had roughly read through the manuscript in his hand. After flying in the air for a full 10 hours, the girl next to him had already fallen asleep on his lap. Eric had not read the original Harry Potter novels in his previous life, but he had watched the movie. At this time, the manuscript in his hand, in Eric's opinion, was probably a compilation of the historical Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone and Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. As the movie would definitely not be able to show the complete plot of the novel, Eric could not tell the difference between the manuscript in his hand and the version in his previous life. However, he only cared about the movie adaptation rights of the novel. As long as the novel was not cancelled, it would be a very simple matter for him to push the novel back on its original track. The twins came over with lunch. Eric handed the manuscript to one of them and patted the sleeping girl. Once the girl fell asleep, she did not want to wake up. She whined and stretched out her 2 small arms to wrap around Eric's body. After a while, she was carried into the dining room by Eric. She ate in a daze, then pulled Eric to rest with her. In order to finish reading the Harry Potter manuscript, Eric sat for the whole morning. After lunch, he was a little tired. He still had to stay in the UK for a few days, and the copyright of Harry Potter was not urgent. He gave the twins a few instructions and carried the girl to the bedroom. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, Eric and the girl got up together and began to prepare for the premiere in the evening. Barbara Broccoli came over in person and discussed some of the details of the premiere again. Although this residence was very close to the Royal Albert Hall, the crew had specially prepared a limousine for them. The red carpet ceremony for the premiere began at 6 o'clock. According to the schedule, Eric and the girl left Garden Street at 6:30. It took less than 5 minutes for them to arrive at the crowded premiere. Because it was midsummer, the sky was not completely dark yet. The long red carpet that led directly to the entrance of the hall was crowded with fans and reporters. The limousine that Eric and Drew were in stopped at the end of the red carpet. As soon as the two got out of the limousine, there were crazy screams on both sides of the red carpet. Eric walked slowly inside with the girl. He heard some girls in the crowd telling the girl to get away from them. He lowered his head and whispered in the girl's ear, "Do you feel pressured?" Drew shook her head with the same smile. "Not at all. I like to hear those envious and jealous voices." Seeing the two of them whispering on the red carpet, the screams and jeers on both sides of the red carpet became louder. The security guards in charge of the security had to be alert to prevent people from rushing onto the red carpet. After walking for more than 10 meters, they passed through the ordinary fans. There were more reporters on both sides, and a few fans were holding all kinds of posters in their hands. When they saw Eric and the girl walking over, they shouted Eric's name, as if hoping to get an autograph. Perhaps because there were fewer people, the fans were not as crazy as before. The two of them struck a few poses side by side, allowing the reporters to take some photos. After that, Drew gently nudged Eric and said, "Eric, I still want to take a few more photos. You go and sign for them." Eric nodded. He saw a few fans on the left side of the red carpet waving the posters in their hands. He walked over with a smile, took the pens in their hands, and quickly wrote. Occasionally, he would cooperate and take photos with them. He walked along the red carpet, signing autographs as he walked forward. After walking for about 5 or 6 meters, Eric had just signed autographs for 2 girls who were flushed with excitement. His eyes drifted not far ahead, and he noticed the figure of a strange woman in the crowd. The other fans were excitedly waving the posters in their hands to take photos. The woman, however, was standing on the outside with her hands empty. She wore a black long-sleeved shirt and white casual pants. She had a head of blonde hair and light makeup. It was hard to tell her age. Perhaps she was in her 30s or 40s. She also had 2 attendants by her side, trying their best to separate the fans around her from the woman. This made her stand out even more in the crowd. Noticing Eric looking over, the woman, who was originally staring at Eric in a daze, had a look of panic in her eyes. She wanted to avoid his gaze, but there was also a look of reluctance. Eric quickly signed his name on a poster handed over by a fan. He took a few steps forward and was already in front of the woman. He clearly felt that he had seen this woman somewhere before, but he couldn't remember at the moment. The two of them looked at each other. The woman's hand on the railing subconsciously lifted, but she quickly put it down. There was a glimmer in her eyes, and she forced a smile at Eric. He didn't know why, but looking at the woman, Eric also had some indescribable emotions in his heart. Waving the pen in his hand, Eric revealed a smile and said, "Miss, do you need me to sign for you?" The woman was stunned for a moment, then nodded. She reached into her pocket and fumbled around a few times, but only took out a 10-pound note. Her voice was very soft, and Eric could only guess the general meaning from the shape of her lips. "Then, sign here." Eric smiled. Seeing the woman holding the note in her hand, he reached out to hold the back of her hand and quickly wrote a string of letters on it. After Eric finished signing, he continued to walk forward. The woman stared blankly at the note in her hand for a moment, then said to the attendant beside her, "Mark, let's go back." "Yes, Mississippi," the attendant named Mark hurriedly nodded. Together with another attendant, they helped the woman push through the crowd and escorted her out of the scene. When they arrived at the parking lot, Mark diligently helped the woman open the door and escorted her into the car. He then got into the driver's seat and started the car. Through the rearview mirror, he looked at the miss who he hadn't seen for more than 20 years. 25 years, or 26 years. At that time, he was still a hothead. Like many people, he couldn't help but admire his miss, but like many people, he only dared to secretly look at her a few more times. Now, so many years had passed. His daughter was about to get married, and his hair was already gray. However, the miss was still the same as before. It was as if time had suddenly stopped on her. With some sighs in his heart, Mark slowed down the car, turned the steering wheel, and drove the car onto the road. After hesitating for a while, he said, Miss likes Williams very much. I've seen him once. He's a very good young man. However, Madam said that it's unlikely that the two of them will be together. Williams doesn't seem to be a very loyal person." The woman didn't respond. She just looked out of the car window. After a moment, she suddenly asked, "My brother should know that I'm back, right?" Mark's face was a little embarrassed, but he still nodded and said, "I'm sorry, Mississippi. I think I should tell Master." "Then send me back." Mark thought he heard wrongly. "Ah. I said, I want to go back and take a look. Oh, of course. Mark finally realized that he didn't hear wrongly. He nodded and said, "We'll go back now. Master and Madam will be very happy." "Oh, I hope he won't beat me out." Mark quickly shook his head. "No, he definitely won't. Master has been missing you all these years. You don't understand." The woman shook her head. Suddenly, she smiled and said, "However, if he dares to hit me, I will fight back." "Ah." Mark was a little stunned. He could only shake his head and said, "No, no, you won't." As they passed through the red carpet area, the girl noticed that Eric's expression was a little strange. She asked, "Eric, what are you thinking about?" Eric shook his head and said, "I don't know. It's just that I seem to have seen an acquaintance somewhere before." Drew said, "The woman in the black shirt?" "Yes, how did you know?" "Haha, it's rare to see a woman in a black shirt. It's so eye-catching. Also, I noticed that you touched her hand. Do you want me to ask around?" "Don't be ridiculous." Eric shook his head and walked into the concert hall with the girl. He left his name on the signature wall and cooperated with the reporters inside the concert hall to take a few photos. When he saw that Michael Wilson had personally brought Prince Charles over, he put aside the small incident and focused on greeting the guests who had come today. The main actors of James Bond, Casino Royale, were all in London, except for the trio and the other supporting male lead who stayed in the United States to handle the publicity. In addition, a large number of British film stars came to support the movie. Even the first 007 actor, Sean Connery, rushed over. Coupled with celebrities from all walks of life in the United Kingdom, the premiere could be said to be a star-studded scene. At 7 o'clock, the 500 invited guests from all walks of life were seated in the concert hall. The lights dimmed and the movie officially began. The prologue began with an assassination. The plot closely followed the previous movie, GoldenEye. 006 betrayed the company and Bond was sent to hunt down the other moles who had betrayed the MI6. Bond was disheartened by the fact that he had killed his former colleagues whom he had spent a lot of time with. Coupled with the collapse of the Soviet Union and the loss of their greatest enemy, the MI6 role in the British government was weakened. Bond then applied to Mrs. M for retirement. Mrs. M did not want her right-hand man to leave, so she sent Bond to the Bahamas for a vacation. In the concert hall, after the prologue, when the iconic opening of the 007 series appeared, Frank Lipton, a reporter from the Times, could not help but nod slightly. It was just a simple opening, but it made him keenly feel that Eric had abandoned the style of the previous 007 series, which was completely independent of the plot, and began to connect the series. Judging from the increasing popularity of MGM's secret agent movie universe, this change was undoubtedly very correct. The plot of the series was connected, and the audience did not need to accept a new story every episode. This could ensure that part of the box office appeal of the previous series would be passed down. However, Frank Lipton knew very well that these minor changes in the plot were not enough for him to get to where he was now. Considering that MGM claimed that this was the first major movie in the secret agent movie universe to achieve a complete crossover of plots, Frank Lipton could not help but begin to worry that the interweaving of the elements of the multiple secret agent movie series would inevitably lead to the entire movie's plot becoming scattered. Although the 007 series had always had these shortcomings before the secret agent movie universe, if this happened to Williams, it would definitely be more disappointing. The opening soon ended. A private plane landed at the airport in the Bahamas. Bond, in a suit, got off the plane and drove through the Bahamas Ring Road. When he checked into a hotel, his habitual flirtatious personality kicked in. Not only did he easily win over Katerina, the wife played by Terry Hatcher, but he also won her husband's Aston Martin sports car at the gambling table. The plot began to separate here. Katerina's husband, Alex, was a grey transaction middleman. When Bond and Katerina were entangled, Alex met with the villain of the episode, Kyrafor, on a cruise ship. Kyrafor was the asset manager of the Spectre gang. An African warlord had just handed him $100 million to manage. Kyrafor heard that the latest wide-body plane of Heaven's Aero Airlines had just been successfully developed and was about to be tested, so he had the idea of sabotaging the plane test of Heaven's Aero Airlines and using the $100 million he had just received to short the company's stock. Due to his suspicious nature, under Alex's recommendation, Kyra hired a bomber who sabotaged the plane test of Heaven's Aero Airlines. Just in case, Kyra casually ordered his men to monitor Alex. Unexpectedly, he discovered Bond's figure. Relying on the powerful intelligence network of the Spectre gang, Bond's true identity was soon exposed in front of Kyra. Fearing that they would fall into the MI6 trap, Kyra issued an order to silence them. Alex and Katerina were quickly assassinated. The unexpected tragic death of his temporary female companion aroused Bond's anger, so he began to actively investigate the ins and outs of the matter. Chapter 887. When Ivanka, who was carrying a doll backpack, and the other 3 beautiful girls passed by Bond, there was a burst of knowing laughter in the theater. Frank Lipton, who had wanted to take advantage of this foreshadowing scene to record some thoughts, could not help but put down his pen with a faint smile. This should be the 4th movie. Although it was a bit tricky for Williams to set such a small Easter egg in every movie he directed, it was really interesting. Chiriv had invested all his funds in selling the shares of Aero Airlines. Although he felt that his action might have been exposed, he could not stop the whole plan. He could only send people to hunt down Bond. However, the villain in charge of the chase was easily dealt with by Bond. Through a string of phone numbers left by Alex, Bond used the MI6 intelligence network to track all the way and soon found the bomber who was about to launch an attack at the Miami airport. At the Miami International Airport, with the fast flashing scenes and the tense soundtrack, the audience was also in high spirits. Although they knew that Bond was destined to stop the bomber's attack, when Bond jumped onto the oil tanker and ran all the way along the airport runway with the bomber, many people could not help but feel a strong sense of worry. While the emotions of ordinary audiences were firmly grasped by this plot, many film critics were only excited. From the moment Bond stepped into the Miami International Airport, jumped onto the oil tanker and dealt with the bomber, and then the moment the policeman was thrown into the air by the engine of the diving passenger plane and rushed to the screen, these few minutes of the plot, whether it was the scene scheduling, the scene editing, or the background music, gave the audience a sense of amazement that could be written into the textbooks. It had to be said that although Eric Williams had been away for 4 years, his directing talent had not declined at all. Instead, it showed signs of further improvement. Frank Lipton, a film critic of the Times, felt that his heart was beating faster with this plot. When the bomber detonated the miniature bomb that Bond had hung on his body, there was a loud bang in the sound system. Frank Lipton even had a sense of joy, as if he had personally destroyed the bomber's plot. He could not help but applaud. At the same time, the whole concert hall was filled with applause. In the front row of the concert hall, Eric was relieved to hear the enthusiastic applause. The producer of the film, Barbara Broccoli, breathed a deep sigh of relief. For Eric, Casino Royale might just be an inconspicuous film in his directing career, but this series was all the glory of the Broccoli family. Casino Royale was the first 007 movie that she and her brother produced after the death of her father, Albert Broccoli. Due to the repeated failures of Hollywood's summer live-action blockbusters this year, Barbara Broccoli was also worried that this film would repeat the same mistakes, so she would fail to live up to her father's trust. Now, the film was only a third of the way through and the audience was already clapping. So, no matter what, the film couldn't be too bad. The attack on Sky Aero Airlines failed, and Kirov lost a huge sum of $100 million. In order to recoup his losses, Kirov planned to hold a winner-take-all bet at the Casino Royale of the Republic of Montenegro. As a terrorist on the list of intelligence agencies of various countries, Kirov's bet attracted a lot of attention. Mrs. M introduced the information about Spectre to Bond and planned for Bond to rush to Montenegro. After winning the bet, he would capture Kirov. The plot finally crossed over with the agent movie universe here. The information that Mrs. M introduced to Bond happened to be intercepted by Ethan Hunt, the male lead of the Mission Impossible series, in Mission Impossible 2, and shared it with other allied intelligence agencies. This plot also appeared in the Easter egg of Mission Impossible 2. After half a year of waiting, they finally saw the plot in the original Easter egg. After the fans of the MGM agent movie universe got an inexplicable satisfaction, they began to look forward to the new Easter egg at the end of the film. For this bet, The MI6 applied for a special fund from the Ministry of Finance. The Ministry of Finance specially sent a clerk to assist Bond in carrying out the task, and at the same time to ensure the safety of the fund. The plot changed to an ordinary apartment in the West End of London. In a room full of all kinds of delicate electronic equipment, a petite girl with a geek style was soldering a circuit board with full concentration. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door. The girl was startled, and the circuit board in her hand was smoking because of a short circuit. Outside the door, a smartly dressed Vesper Lind was dragging a suitcase. When she saw her sister open the door with gray stains on her face, she looked a little helpless. She took out a handkerchief and carefully wiped her sister's face a few times. With a helpless and doting look in her eyes, she said, "Next time, I must talk to the so-called person in charge of the Charlie Townsend Foundation again. I have a feeling that they are up to no good. How can anyone provide a 16-year-old girl with a scholarship of £10,000 a year and those inexplicable training?" Angela Lind was like any child who resisted their old-fashioned parents. She retorted, "Hey, sister, that's because I'm a genius." "Oh, okay, my little genius." Vesper Lind smiled and put away the handkerchief. She kissed her sister's face and said, "I'm going on a business trip soon. It might take a week. Take care of yourself during this time." A flash of joy flashed across Angela Lind's face, but she immediately hid it and answered obediently, "Of course, sister. I'll take care of myself." Vesper Lind pinched the girl's face shrewdly and smiled. "Don't be too proud. I've asked Aunt Carol. She'll help me look after you." Angela Lind seemed to have thought of something terrible and begged reluctantly, "Sister, I'm your sister. Of course, that's why I have to prevent you, this little angel, from flying to the sky when I'm not around." In the concert hall, the audience listened to the amusing conversation between the Lind sisters and smiled. The James Bond series had always lacked humor. The current plot should be regarded as a small breakthrough for the James Bond series. At the same time, in just 2 minutes, Angela Lind's eccentric elf and Vesper Lind's shrewdness had already left a clear impression on the audience. The brief interaction between the two sisters also paved the way for the subsequent plot. Although Christina Aguilera's performance in a few short scenes was outstanding, the film critics still paid more attention to Cate Blanchett's role as the #1 Bond girl. The new Bond girl from Australia had been highly controversial since the confirmation of the role. Ordinary fans felt that she was not beautiful enough and did not meet the usual standards of a Bond girl. The Circle also felt that Eric Williams was too hasty to suddenly use such a newcomer who had only acted in a few TV series. However, in a few short scenes, Vesper Lind, who was dressed in a black professional suit, did not lose out to Angela Lind, who was designed to attract the audience's attention. Then, the dialogue between Vesper Lind and Bond on the train to Montenegro surprised the film critics even more. They could feel that in this performance, Pierce Brosnan was completely suppressed and could not fight back at all. In order to maintain the balance between the two characters, the director obviously paid more attention to Pierce Brosnan. This focus made people look forward to Cate Blanchett's scenes more. As for the ordinary audience, after a few scenes, they had basically unknowingly forgotten their dissatisfaction with Cate Blanchett for getting the role. Most people began to feel that the Australian actress' role as Vesper Lind was very cool. In the casino scene, Eric deleted some unnecessary details in the original version to make the plot more compact. He also added a second interlude of the Secret Service movie universe in the plot. An assistant of Ethan Hunt in Mission Impossible was sent to the gambling game and lent his gambling money to Bond at the critical moment to help him win the final victory. At the same time, at the end of this plot, the film also added a plot where Kirov sent someone to kidnap Angela to threaten Vesper. In the whole gambling game, from the tit-for-tat at the beginning to the tacit cooperation at the critical moment of the game, Bond and Vesper gradually developed feelings for each other. After Vesper helped Bond kill someone, the scene of them hugging in the bathroom made the hazy feelings between the two officially sublimate. At the end of the gambling game, Kirov, who had lost, was desperate. He captured Bond and tortured him in an attempt to get back the $100 million in cash. In a hazy figure in front of him, Bond fainted. When he woke up again, the hazy figure became clear. Vesper was by his side, telling him that Kirov was dead and the whole thing was over. Bond did not delve into what had happened before he fainted. The two officially fell in love. In order to stay with Vesper forever, Bond began to prepare a resignation letter to Mrs. M. However, everything was obviously not over. Kirov's embezzlement of funds was discovered by the Ghost Gang and he was punished. However, Vesper's sister fell into the hands of the Ghost Gang. In order to rescue Bond and his sister, Vesper made a deal with the Ghost Gang to help them get back the $100 million from Bond. However, when Vesper transferred the $100 million to the Ghost Gang's account, he found that he had been deceived. At the same time, Bond, who had discovered Vesper's abnormality, also thought that he had discovered everything. Vesper, who had betrayed his lover and failed to save his sister, had nothing left to live for. He chose to commit suicide in the underwater cage. However, before he left, he still held a glimmer of hope and stuffed the necklace with a photo of himself and his sister into Bond's hands. Why do I need time? The work is over and the B*TCH is dead. On the cruise ship on the coast of Venice, the disheartened Bond was like a wounded lone wolf. He indifferently played with a heart-shaped necklace in his hand as he replied to Mrs. M.'s concerned words on the phone. At this moment, although Bond had abandoned the hope of returning to the life of an ordinary person and had once again become the cold superagent, everyone felt that Bond at this moment was a real ordinary person, a mortal. On the screen, Mrs. M. explained the ins and outs of everything to Bond. Bond opened the heart-shaped pendant and found the photo of Vesper and Angela smiling brightly. He embarked on the journey to rescue Angela. The final battle was about to begin. In the concert hall, Frank Lipton felt that the female fan behind him, who had just been sobbing because of the farewell scene between Bond and Vesper, had gradually stopped sobbing. However, he was still recalling every scene of Cate Blanchett's appearance in the first hour. He was not even in the mood to pay attention to the final battle between the three angels and Bond after their appearance. Due to his interest in this movie, Frank Lipton had collected some information about Cate Blanchett before. However, as she was just an Australian newcomer who had just entered Hollywood, the information he could find was pitifully little. Therefore, after watching Cate Blanchett's performance, Frank Lipton was even more shocked. From the beginning, in just a few scenes, the actress had perfectly supported the image of Vesper Lynd. In every subsequent appearance, in every scene, the actress gave people a perfect feeling of, "I am Vesper Lynd." This kind of acting talent had definitely reached the level of an Oscar. She was even better than many Oscar winners who had already won the Oscars. Suddenly, another name popped up in Frank Lipton's mind. Meryl Streep. Perhaps this actress, who had made her debut in Hollywood commercial blockbusters, would become the second Meryl Streep. Thinking of this, Frank Lipton suddenly felt a little regretful. He knew that according to the rules of Hollywood, acting as a Bond girl in a commercial blockbuster like the 007 series was bound to attract strong Hollywood attention. In the future, the development of this amazingly talented actress might be more like Nicole Kidman, who would become a commercial actress again. This was simply a waste of resources. Eric Williams had created so many commercial actresses. There was no need to destroy a potential literary superstar. After thinking for a while, Frank Lipton thought of the film that Alison Owen, a good friend of his in the British film industry, was preparing. Although it was a low-budget film, it was definitely a movie with a leading actress. Maybe he could introduce her to him at the next party. Although Cate Blanchett was from Australia, her London accent in the film was perfect. She was definitely good enough to play the role. Knowing that this was a rare opportunity, Frank Lipton quietly left his seat and went outside the theater to make a phone call. Chapter 888. I'm Bond, James Bond. In the concert hall, after Bond and the Angel Trio destroyed the Spectre's base and rescued Angela, along with 007's iconic line, the scene froze and the credits began to appear. Although it was a premiere, there would usually be some commotion even if the audience didn't leave immediately. But this time, when the subtitles appeared, there was no movement at all. Although 007 Casino Royale was an out-and-out commercial action blockbuster, other than those thrilling big scenes, the movie still gave people countless details that they could recall over and over again. Of course, the upcoming Easter egg was one of the most important reasons why everyone waited patiently. My dad said that the more mysterious the boss is, the faster it dies. Look, he was right again. I wonder if Charlie will cover his face when the explosion happens. I haven't seen what he looks like yet. After the credits ended, the scene gradually lit up. It was still the chatty voice of Lucy, played by Penelope, but this time, there was a hint of panic and sadness in her tone. The scene became clear. 3 tall figures in tight clothes were looking for something in the ruins of a house that had been hit by a bomb. Jill and Selena worked together to lift up a collapsed wall, and Lucy squatted down to clean up a pile of debris. Soon, she found 2 walkie-talkies tied together. Well, it seems like we don't have to change bosses. God knows, we haven't even received this month's salary. Lucy sniffled and mumbled a few words while crying and laughing. Jill and Selena also gathered around. The slightly scorched walkie-talkie suddenly made a buzzing sound. When the angel trio on the screen and the audience in the concert hall were all waiting for the sound from the walkie-talkie, the scene suddenly went completely dark. Fuck. Many of the audience in the concert hall, who had just been wetted, couldn't help but curse in their hearts. But when the lights came on, everyone still applauded enthusiastically. Whether it was the guests at the premiere, the media critics, or the fans at the scene, they were all very satisfied with the movie. Even some film critics who had been instructed to find fault with the movie couldn't help but give the movie an 8 out of 10. Many people were obviously not satisfied. When the simple press conference began, the first reporter called out asked Eric, "Mr. Williams, I'm a reporter from The Guardian. May I ask about the last Easter egg? Is it because the Angel Trio and Bond destroyed the Ghost Gang's base together, causing the boss of the detective agency, Charlie Townsend, to be retaliated against by the Ghost Gang?" "I can't answer this question," Eric said with a smile on the stage. "But since you're obviously a fan of the Secret Service movie universe, the answer is yes." There was a burst of laughter in the venue. The reporter, who still looked a little shy, was a little embarrassed. He was indeed a die-hard fan of the MGM Secret Service movie universe series. Otherwise, he wouldn't have made such a quick connection with a few clueless scenes. He even gave up on the questions he had prepared and couldn't wait to ask Eric for confirmation. Naturally, there was only one chance to ask a question. He had no choice but to hand over the microphone in his hand. Another reporter from the Daily Telegraph got the chance to ask a question. "Mr. Williams, what do you think about the consecutive failures of this summer's big live-action movies? Do you think the box office of Casino Royale will be affected by these factors? The audience is looking forward to good movies. If the studio only has the ambition to catch up with the box office of Titanic, but doesn't put in the sincerity of excellence like Titanic, then they are doomed to failure. As for Casino Royale, I did everything I could, so I'm very confident in the box office prospects of the movie. Then do you think Casino Royale can catch up with the box office of Titanic?" Another reporter asked a more biting question. Eric didn't hesitate too much. He beat around the bush and said, "That depends on whether the fans want to create another box office miracle." Eric's answers to several questions were somewhat official. The reporters in the audience realized that it was difficult to get too much sensitive information from Eric, so they turned the muzzle and asked questions to Cate Blanchett, the rookie. Although Cate Blanchett's agent had repeatedly told her how to deal with the reporters before the premiere, Cate still found it difficult to resist the siege of these reporters. She inevitably fell into the reporters' trap several times. Eric, Barbara Broccoli, and others had to take the initiative to help Cate block some of the questions. "I'm so sorry, Eric. I didn't expect that the question about Charlie and the others was actually directed at you." After the press conference, at the party at the Hyde Park Hotel, Eric had just socialized around when Cate Blanchett took the initiative to apologize with a glass of wine. Eric shook his head with a smile and said, "It's okay. You'll have experience in such occasions in the future. By the way, everyone said that your performance was amazing. Do you have a plan for your next movie?" As a newcomer, when Cate got the role of Vesper Lynd, she naturally signed an option contract with Firefly for 3 movies. Her next 2 movies had to be selected from Firefly's film company, but these details didn't require Eric's personal intervention. Cate shook her head and said, "Not yet. The New Line has recommended a few scripts to me, but Ron wants me to wait until Casino Royale is released before making a decision." As soon as Kate finished speaking, she suddenly realized that she shouldn't have mentioned the idea of waiting for the best price in front of Eric. She couldn't help but blush a little. She was so embarrassed that she even wanted to run away. Eric just smiled and didn't mind too much. He even had a good impression of Kate's frankness. Just as he was about to take the initiative to change the topic, a middle-aged man and woman walked over side by side. The man looked to be about 50 years old. He was tall and had a full beard on his face. The woman was about 30 or 40 years old. Unlike the other female guests at the party who were dressed in formal wear, this woman was wearing a professional suit. She had a somewhat shrewd and capable temperament. "Hello, Mr. Williams. I'm Frank Lipton, a film critic." Although he came for Kate, Frank Lipton reached out his hand to Eric first. Eric shook the other party's hand. When he saw the woman beside Frank Lipton sizing up Kate without trying to hide it, he could roughly guess the purpose of their visit. He gestured at the woman and asked Frank Lipton with a smile, "And this is?" The woman quickly retracted her gaze from Kate and politely reached out her hand to Eric. She introduced herself, "Mr. Williams, my name is Allison Owen. I'm a producer from Working Title Film Company." Working Title, Eric recalled. He remembered the Coen brothers' Frozen Bloodstorm last year, as well as the Oscar hits Walk on the Death Row and 4 Weddings and a Funeral from a few years ago. The name of this company was on the list of production companies. In his mind, some of the other films that had yet to appear seemed to have the imprint of this film company as well. In this way, the status of this company in the United Kingdom should be similar to that of Gaumont Film Company in France. Of course, if it was in Hollywood, it could only be regarded as a second-tier company at most. There were still a lot of guests around that needed to be entertained. Realizing that the two had come for Kate, Eric took the initiative to leave. If the two wanted to invite Kate to act in a film, naturally, they would have to go through Firefly. Eric would not interfere with anything now. The United Kingdom was 5 hours earlier than the United States Eastern Time. Due to the time difference, Eric and the girl did not get much rest after the party. Early the next morning, the first batch of film reviews for James Bond, Casino Royale appeared in the British newspapers. Near noon, the film reviews from the United States also came in one after another. The plot of the film is tight and smooth. The 145-minute plot can be said to be completed in one go. Eric Williams, after Jurassic Park, has returned as the king. The Guardian, after a series of bad summer movies, Casino Royale, has finally brought us a popular visual feast. The Daily Telegraph, the performance of the new Australian actress, Cate Blanchett, is amazing. Vesper Lynd is destined to be the most classic Bond girl in the James Bond series. Christina Aguilera, the youngest Bond girl in the history of James Bond, also gave us a satisfying performance during her brief appearance. The arrival of the 3 angels from the sky was a pleasant surprise. Of course, there is also the long-awaited Ragdoll Girl. Williams never disappoints the fans. However, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Well, I can only say that Casino Royale is definitely the most popular Bond movie in the history of James Bond. News of the World, even without the interlude of the secret agent universe, Casino Royale, directed by Eric Williams, can be said to have redefined the James Bond series. In the film, James Bond finally stopped wearing a suit and leather shoes. He started to get hurt, tired, in love, and started to pursue the life of an ordinary person. Perhaps, this is the Bond that everyone really wants to see. Bond and Vesper's farewell under the water was heartbreaking. The sentence, "The work is over, the bitch is dead." It gave people a feeling of despair. Although Bond was reborn in the end and became the super agent that frightened the enemy, we can be sure that from now on, Bond will become a real mortal, and no longer a high and unrealistic screen symbol. New York Times. There is no doubt that MGM's Secret Agent Universe project is officially on track after James Bond, Casino Royale. Eric Williams has a perfect grasp of the intersection of the 3 series. The overall style of the James Bond series is not affected by the 2 series at all, but the intersection of the 3 series brings more entertainment to the fans. San Francisco Chronicle. In the mansion on Kensington Garden Street, Eric and the girl had just finished lunch. They were still sitting in the dining room looking at the movie review summary that Peter Ritchie had just sent over. After patiently flipping through the movie review summary in her hand, the girl looked up excitedly. The overall score is 9 points. Eric, how much do you think we can get at the box office this time? In Eric's hand was the North American box office data that had just been tabulated last week. In the second week of its release, Finding Nemo once again earned $63 million at the box office. In 2 weeks, the total box office had reached $163 million, and it continued to lead the entire summer season under the envious eyes of everyone. The major box office statistics agencies no longer doubted that Finding Nemo had the ability to hit the $300 million box office in North America. In comparison, the box office of Batman and Robin in the first week was only $47 million. The media's comprehensive rating for this $125 million comic adaptation had not only dropped to 1 point, but the box office in the first week was also far less than the $70 million that Godzilla earned a few weeks ago. Time Warner Group had publicly announced that they would stop all of DC's comic adaptation projects. Due to the box office failure of Batman and Robin, the industry also showed signs of decline in the Spider-Man and Iron Man projects that were launched at the same time by Firefly. Avi Allard even called to say that some of the actors who were interested in appearing in the 2 comic adaptations suddenly became cold. Even CAA, the agency of Stuart Runkle, took the opportunity to raise their offer and asked to reduce the number of contracts from 6 movies to 3. While thinking about these things, Eric heard the girl's words. He put down the box office data in his hand and roughly browsed through the movie review of Casino Royale. He said, "This is hard to say. Although North America has always been the biggest box office market for the James Bond series. But on the other hand, the James Bond series is actually not very popular in North America. I think based on the current reputation, plus my personal box office appeal and the halo of the secret agent movie universe, the box office of Casino Royale in North America should be able to reach $200 million. It might be better overseas at $400 million. After all, the influence of Jurassic Park was still there." Eric, why are you not as confident as us? I just talked to AI Me. She thinks that the box office of this film in North America might be able to reach $300 million. Eric smiled and said, "It's meaningless to say this now. When the box office of the first day in North America comes out tomorrow, we should be able to make a rough judgment." Okay. The girl also put this topic aside for the time being. She blinked and said, "Then what are we doing in the afternoon?" Chapter 889. Los Angeles. In the wealthy district halfway up the mountain in the north of Santa Monica, although it was already late at night, Amy Pascal was still reading the negotiation materials with a basic cable company about Rainbow Media. As a woman, although she gave up a high-paying position at Columbia Pictures to help Drew set up Flower Pictures, which gave her the opportunity to be in charge of MGM, one of the 7 major film companies, Amy Pascal didn't want to slack off at all. No matter what field it was always more difficult for a woman in a high position to gain recognition than a man. After so many years, Amy Pascal no longer cared about how others looked at her, but she still wanted to prove to everyone that she was not inferior to any man. On the other side of the study, Amy Pascal's husband, Bernard Weinlaub, was checking the draft he had just finished. He looked at the electronic watch on the table, and it was already midnight. Usually, they would be asleep at this time. However, he also knew that his wife wouldn't be able to sleep until she saw the box office data of Casino Royale. After hesitating for a moment, Bernard Weinlaub didn't want to disturb his wife who was reading the documents seriously. He picked up a book from the table and started reading quietly. Amy Pascal noticed her husband's action and looked at her watch. She turned around and said, "Bernie, why don't you go and rest first? I might have to wait a little longer." Bernard Weinlaub shook his head and smiled. "No, I actually want to know how much Casino Royale can get on the first day of the movie." Amy Pascal smiled gently and didn't try to persuade him anymore. She got up and went to the kitchen to make a pot of hot coffee. She poured a cup for herself and her husband. Bernard Weinlaub picked up the coffee cup and looked at his wife who was sitting on the other side of the table. He said, "From today's reviews, this should be the best live-action movie in the summer. How much do you think it can get at the box office?" Amy Pascal shook her head. She had always been full of confidence when discussing this topic with others, but in front of her husband, there was no need for her to pretend to be confident. She said, "It's really hard to say. 2 years ago, GoldenEye also scored about 8 out of 10 in all aspects, but the global box office was only $350 million. This was mainly because the 007 series was not that popular in the most important North American market. Although Casino Royale has a better reputation this time, and there are many other positive factors, we're not sure if the audience will buy it. Also, starting from The Fifth Element in May, the consecutive disappointing live-action movies with poor reviews may also reduce the audience's interest in Casino Royale." Bernard Weintraub was a playwright and a film business reporter for the New York Times. Hearing his wife's pessimistic tone, he thought for a moment and said, "I think the truth might be the opposite of what you think. The audience's demand for live-action movies was definitely greater than for animated movies. The continuous impact of bad movies will make the market even more hungry for commercial movies with high scores." Amy Pascal smiled and said, "I hope the situation is as you said. However, the total investment for the production and marketing of Casino Royale is $160 million, which is equivalent to twice the total investment for GoldenEye. The company is still under a lot of pressure. If the box office performance of Casino Royale isn't good enough, even if it's just average, the implementation of the subsequent production plans may not be so smooth." "Oh, is it the Lord of the Rings trilogy you mentioned last time?" Amy Pascal nodded and didn't say anything more. Although he was her husband, it wasn't convenient for her to disclose too many details to him. Bernard Weintraub didn't ask any more questions and casually changed the topic. Unknowingly, they waited for more than half an hour before Amy Pascal's phone on the desk finally vibrated. She picked up the phone and chatted with the person on the other end for a while. Gradually, she raised her eyebrows and asked about some details with uncertainty. Bernard Weintraub had already heard a set of numbers from his wife's conversation. He also raised his eyebrows in surprise. Although he felt that the box office performance of Casino Royale would be better than expected after a series of bad movies released during the summer, he still didn't expect the box office number to be so high on the first day. After Amy Pascal hung up the phone, Bernard Weintraub couldn't wait and asked, $35 million? Amy Pascal put the phone back on the desk and breathed a sigh of relief. With obvious excitement on her face, she nodded and said, "Yes, including the $3 million from the night show in the morning. The box office on the first day is $35 million. God. $35 million. It's unbelievable. I've been thinking that if we can get $20 million on the first day, everyone should be very satisfied. You know, the last movie, GoldenEye, only got a little over $9 million on the first day. God. $35 million. It's unbelievable." Bernard Weintraub heard his wife's constant exclamations, but he didn't feel that she had lost her composure at all. As a film business reporter who was very familiar with Hollywood, Bernard Weintraub was no less shocked than his wife. One had to know that the best-performing movie on the first day of the summer, Godzilla, only had a box office of $75 million on the first day due to the high midnight box office data driven by the bombardment of publicity in the early stages. Even the biggest dark horse of the summer, Finding Nemo, only had a box office of $22 million on the first day. With its excellent reputation, Casino Royale would definitely not walk out of the dismal box office curve of Godzilla or Batman and Robin. Then, with a box office of $35 million on the first day, the box office on Saturday and Sunday would definitely not be much worse than the first day. Even with an average of $30 million per day, the box office of Casino Royale would reach a high of $90 million in the first weekend, and there was no doubt that it would break $100 million in the first week. In fact, Casino Royale would definitely set a series of box office records again. Because this box office data was too unexpected, when Amy Pascal received the news, many film company executives and newspaper reporters inside and outside Hollywood were also awakened by the ringing of their phones in the middle of the night. Some people had mixed feelings, some were too excited to sleep, and some even suspected that this was a prank. Countless newspapers in North America even rewrote their press releases overnight. In the case of the dismal box office of the summer live-action blockbuster, the high box office of Casino Royale on the first day was undoubtedly a bit dazzling in the eyes of many people. Therefore, the next day, there were even a lot of news questioning the box office of Casino Royale on the first day in the North American media. However, reality quickly shut these media outlets up. After the first day of $35 million on Saturday, the box office of Casino Royale not only did not fall, but it also reached a new high, reaching $83.85 million. On the following Sunday, although the box office drop was a bit obvious, the box office was still as high as $26.7 million. In the 3 days from June 27th to June 29th, the box office of Casino Royale reached an unprecedented $91.05 million in the first weekend. Even Finding Nemo was affected by Casino Royale. At the end of the third week of its release, the box office dropped by 40%, only earning $38 million. The box office of Batman and Robin in the second week of its release was even worse. Compared to the first weekend, the box office dropped by 63%, only earning $15.73 million in the first 3 days of its release. The box office accumulated to $75.2 million in the first 10 days of its release. It was not even as good as the box office of Casino Royale in the first weekend. When the box office of Casino Royale was released for the first weekend, the media, who were prejudiced against the box office, had to put down their doubts in the face of reality. They began to analyze the reason for the box office of Casino Royale in the first weekend. Perhaps, from the beginning, we have greatly underestimated the commercial potential of MGM's Agent Cinematic Universe. Now that I think about it, when the new James Bond jumped off the cliff in the first Easter egg of Charlie, Eric Williams had already begun to plan for this huge movie. For the sequels of Mission Impossible, Charlie, and James Bond series, MGM had been using Easter eggs to allow the 3 agent movies to interact with each other. Through this subtle influence, the popularity of the 3 agent movies that were originally unrelated began to gradually merge. In the end, when MGM officially announced the Agent Cinematic Universe project to the public, the fans of the 3 agent movies had already formed a very large potential audience. Here, we have to mention that in July 1995, when MGM announced the Agent Cinematic Universe project to the public, another seemingly insignificant incident happened. According to the media during that period, MGM bought all the rights of Ghost Gang from Kevin Mike Gaylor for $2 million. The twists and turns behind this incident can be traced back to a few decades ago, so let's not talk about it for now. However, I'm sure that Kevin Mike Gaylor will definitely regret this deal in the future. Back to the topic at hand. While buying the copyright of the Ghost Gang, MGM, Flower Pictures, and DreamWorks Productions merged into one under the control of Eric Williams. With the Ghost Gang as the ultimate villain of the 3 major agent franchises, starting from Mission Impossible 2, the plan to integrate the agent movie universes officially began. Before the release of James Bond, Casino Royale, MGM's Agent Cinematic Universe had actually built a strong foundation of popularity with Charlie's Angels 1, Mission Impossible 1, GoldenEye 007, Charlie's Angels 2, and Mission Impossible 2. The explosive box office data of James Bond, Casino Royale's explosive box office data was the manifestation of the strength of the 3 agent movies that originally had strong box office appeal after years of intermingling and merging popularity with each other. The article on The Hollywood Reporter deeply analyzed the deep-seated reasons for the high box office of Casino Royale. This article made Hollywood, which had yet to cool down from the box office of Titanic, once again heated up. They all began to search their film copyright library to see if there were any blockbuster series that could build a cinematic universe. Although Firefly's plan to build a Marvel Cinematic Universe had not been officially announced to the public, this news was no longer a secret in the circle. Inspired, a producer under Warner Brothers quickly submitted a report to the group's top management about the establishment of a DC Cinematic Universe. Unfortunately, Batman and Robin had just experienced a fiasco, and Warner Brothers would not be able to start a DC Comics adaptation for the next few years. The report that the producer wrote after staying up late was directly thrown into the trash can by Time Warner's top management. While The Hollywood Reporter was analyzing the reasons for the box office of Casino Royale, when the first week of Casino Royale ended, another important Hollywood magazine, Variety, also published their opinions on the super high box office of Casino Royale on their official website. The audience is looking forward to good movies. If the studio only has the ambition to catch up with the box office of Titanic, but doesn't put in the sincerity of Titanic, then they are doomed to failure. Eric Williams's answer to a reporter's question at the London premiere of Casino Royale is undoubtedly the truest commentary on the box office performance of this summer's live-action blockbuster. Admittedly, when any studio invests tens of millions or even hundreds of millions of dollars in a movie, it is impossible not to want to make the movie well. But as we all know, since the birth of movies, the amount of production budget has never been directly related to the quality of the movie. The ability of the screenwriter, actor, director, producer, and other film personnel has a strong impact on a movie. Before Casino Royale, the other two ambitious movies, Godzilla and Batman and Robin, had a production budget that exceeded Casino Royale. But among these movies, only Casino Royale perfectly achieved all the elements that a commercial blockbuster should have, such as a smooth plot, hot scenes, well-written lines, three-dimensional characters, and so on. Through Casino Royale, Eric Williams, who returned after 4 years of silence, once again perfectly showed his amazing talent in directing and film production. Over the past 4 years, when we thought that this young man, who had relied on Home Alone, Ghost, Tornado, Jurassic Park, and other films to reach the peak of Hollywood step by step, would retire and enjoy life after accumulating a huge amount of wealth, relying on the redefinition of a veteran agent series that has lasted for 30 years, Eric Williams once again showed us what the Return of the King is. Although the two animated movies The Lion King 2 and Finding Nemo performed very well in the box office in June, this didn't change the market position of live-action movies as the mainstream demand of the movie public. However, during this summer, which was supposed to be the best time for live-action movies, a series of mediocre, rough, or obscure live-action movies repeatedly hit the confidence of movie fans when they walked into the cinema. According to statistics, from the beginning of the summer on May 30th to the release of Casino Royale, compared to last year, the number of people who went to the cinema in North America dropped by 18%. And this was without excluding the two animated movies The Lion King 2 and Finding Nemo. However, although we were disappointed with the summer live-action movies, as a necessary entertainment in people's lives, the demand of movie fans didn't disappear. The appearance of Casino Royale, which had a great reputation, just happened to fill the large market gap that had accumulated in the early part of the summer. Therefore, under everyone's surprised and even skeptical gazes, Casino Royale broke all the box office records in Hollywood with a terrifying box office of US $30.5 million on the first day, US $91.05 million on the first weekend, and US $117.51 million on the first week. Chapter 890. After the premiere, Drew and Eric spent a weekend in London before flying back to Los Angeles. MGM and Warner Brothers had a meeting with E! Entertainment TV station would have a signing ceremony on Wednesday and the girl needed to attend. On the second day of the premiere, Eric secretly asked the head of Firefly's UK branch to contact J.K. Rowling about the film and TV rights of the Harry Potter series. In order to make sure nothing went wrong, Eric did not leave in a hurry. The box office of Casino Royale had achieved unexpected success. After a busy month in Los Angeles, there was nothing for him to do in person for the time being, so Eric planned to take a break in London. While Casino Royale broke a series of box office records in North America, the currency system in Southeast Asia also entered hell. On July 2nd, after 2 weeks of counterattacks against currency speculators, the Thai government ran out of ammunition and was forced to abandon the fixed exchange rate for the Thai baht. On the day of the announcement, the Thai baht fell by 17% against the US dollar. Because of the loss of the Thai baht, the Singapore dollar, the Philippines peso, the Indonesian rupiah, the Malaysian ringgit, and other Southeast Asian currencies began to fluctuate violently. In the next few months, Southeast Asian countries would become the hunting ground for international currency speculators. According to Chris's message from Tokyo, as of the close of trading on Friday, July 4th, Firefly had secretly built a large short position on the Thai baht. In just 3 days, they had made a paper profit of more than $30 million. And this was just the beginning. London. Early Saturday morning, not long after Eric woke up, Peter Ritchie rushed over with good news. Firefly's UK branch had successfully obtained the film adaptation rights of the Harry Potter series. Eric, we have signed the copyright contract with Ms. Rowling for the Harry Potter series. In addition, the document contains the story outline she wrote for the series. Ms. Rowling will arrive in London at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I will personally send her over to talk to you. After handing a few documents to Eric, Peter Ritchie continued, also, there's news from San Francisco. The first batch of products from the new Firefly Player Factory has been taken off the production line. Mr. Victor Mike Nelly hopes to cancel the Amazon purchase in advance on July 10th and release the products in Europe at the same time. Eric read the Harry Potter copyright contract in his hand and said, North America will be able to buy it in advance. The monthly production capacity of the two factories was only 450,000 units, and the North American market was still in short supply. If they started to sell in Europe now, there would only be shortages on both sides. Moreover, the online music store here was also a big problem. Tell them to wait until the second-generation product is released next year to consider this matter. Forget it, I will personally call them today to communicate with them. Peter Ritchie nodded and briefly reported the contents of a few other documents. When Eric put down the contract in his hand, Peter Ritchie took out an invitation from his briefcase and handed it over. This is from Kensington Palace. Concubine Di will be holding a charity banquet to raise funds for the relief of the Bosnia-Herzegovina refugees tonight. I hope you can attend. Eric took the invitation and looked at it with a playful smile. He said casually, I remember reading in the newspaper 2 days ago that she seems to be planning to get engaged recently. Peter Ritchie didn't know why Eric suddenly mentioned this. Unless Eric specifically asked him to collect information, Peter Ritchie usually didn't pay attention to such gossip. However, after Concubine Di and Prince Charles officially divorced last year, many rich people began to blatantly pursue her. Obviously, for these people, being able to woo a former queen of the United Kingdom was definitely enough to satisfy some dark vanity. Moreover, Peter Ritchie secretly looked at Eric. He couldn't help but think that according to his boss personality, it was very likely that he would also pursue Concubine Di. When Eric saw that Peter Ritchie was silent, he raised his head and happened to notice the strange look on his face. He couldn't help but laugh. You think I'm interested in Diana? This. Peter Ritchie hurriedly shook his head. He looked embarrassed and didn't know how to answer for a moment. Eric casually threw the invitation on the coffee table and said, I'm not interested in her. She's just a pitiful and silly woman who doesn't know how to leave room for others and herself. Eric's nonsensical words made Peter Ritchie a little confused. However, he had already finished his work report for the day. The girl named Christina Aguilera in the villa's dining room was obviously still waiting for Eric to have breakfast with her, so he took the initiative to leave. However, even as he drove out of Kensington Garden Street, Eric's words just now kept repeating in his mind. After driving for some distance on Kensington Garden Street, Peter Ritchie finally couldn't hide his curiosity and stopped the car. He walked to a newspaper stand by the roadside and bought a few newspapers. After that, he returned to the car and searched for the recent news about Concubine Di. It turned out that Concubine Di had recently been talking about marriage with Dodi Fade, the son of Muhammad Al Fade, the boss behind the famous Harrods department store in London. Some newspapers even speculated that Concubine Di was now pregnant. After reading the relevant news and repeatedly pondering over Eric's words, Peter Ritchie suddenly felt a chill in his heart. Just from the name alone, it wasn't hard to tell Dodie Fade's family background and religion. However, England had been a devout Catholic country since ancient times. Currently, the other 15 countries in the world that still worship the Queen of England as their head of state were basically Catholic countries as well. Although they were no longer as glorious as they were in the Middle Ages, the influence of religion on Western countries was still far beyond what outsiders could imagine. As the mother of Prince William, the second-in-line heir to the English throne, Diana had found a Muselin as a stepfather for the future, by the grace of God, the supreme head of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland and overseas territories, the guardian of faith, His Majesty the King of the British Empire. Wasn't that leaving no room for negotiation? Recalling Eric's tone when he said those words, Peter Ritchie couldn't help but shudder when he thought of the exciting parts. He rolled up the few newspapers in front of him and threw them aside. He decided to forget everything that he had heard today. Although he had a good impression of Concubine Di, this was definitely not something a nobody like him could interfere in. Kensington Garden Villa. After Peter Ritchie left, Christina walked out of the dining room. The girl was wrapped in a small apron, which made her look strangely sexy. Before Drew returned to Los Angeles, he specially brought Christina, who had come to London to attend the premiere of Casino Royale with him. The girl didn't hide her selfishness at all. She claimed that instead of letting Eric fool around, it was better to let a familiar woman stay by his side. Due to growing up in a bumpy single-parent family, Christina was much more mature than other girls her age. Therefore, she was more knowledgeable about the ways of the world. This could be seen from the fact that she was able to gain Drew's approval. Although the girl always acted like she could get close to anyone, she was actually more picky than Eric. There weren't many people who could really get close to her. Although she would occasionally have some thoughts, the girl had always been obedient and lovely in front of Eric, which made him feel very comfortable. Seeing that Eric was still reading the documents, Christina walked over and sat down next to him. She said, "Eric, let's eat first. Breakfast is getting cold." Eric nodded. Just as he was about to take the few folders on the coffee table to the dining room to read and eat, Christina took the initiative to come over and help Eric pick up the stack of folders. She said, "Let me do it." "Okay." Eric smiled, got up, and walked to the dining room. Christina was about to get up and follow him when she noticed the invitation on the coffee table. She picked it up and looked at it curiously. When Eric and Peter Ritchie were talking about business, the girl always tactfully avoided them. She did not hear the conversation between the two just now. Now that she saw that it was an invitation to Princess Diana's charity banquet, Christina was suddenly interested. Anything that involved the British royal family was quite attractive to her. They went to the dining room and placed the folder next to Eric. Christina pointed at the invitation that was specially placed at the top with a hopeful look. "Eric, are we going to this banquet tonight?" Eric asked. "You want to go?" Christina nodded without hiding anything. "Yes." "Then let's go and join in the fun tonight." Eric nodded. Although he would not interfere with certain things, there was no need to deliberately avoid it. However, you have to donate money to attend this banquet. If they ask for too much, I'll have no choice but to donate you. Christina attentively brought the breakfast over and smiled. Hee, you won't. Joe and Rowling felt that her recent experiences were like a dream. Ever since she graduated from university 10 years ago, her life had been very unsatisfactory. Her only marriage had brought her great trauma. At one point, she even had thoughts of suicide because of depression. After the divorce, she settled down in Edinburgh, Scotland with her daughter, Jessica. The mother and daughter also lived on less than £100 a month for a time. Although her life was poor, Joe and Rowling, who had managed to settle down, finally decided to focus on becoming a novelist. However, the first novel that she completed in 2 years had been rejected 6 times in the past few months. Just when she had lost hope, a week ago, people from HarperCollins and the British branch of the Firefly Group suddenly came to her door and expressed their willingness to arrange for her novel to be published. At the same time, they hoped to buy the film adaptation rights of the novel. Due to her lack of money, Joe and Rowling naturally could not afford to hire a professional agent. When faced with the representatives of HarperCollins and Firefly Group, she could only negotiate with them based on her own little tricks. In fact, she did not dare to have any extravagant hopes in her heart. She was already very satisfied that the novel could be published. Moreover, the price that Firefly Group offered for the novel's copyright even made her feel unreal. £1,000,000 per novel. She had never thought that she would have so much money before. Moreover, in the preliminary draft of the story outline, she planned to write 5 novels. Under such circumstances, Joe and Rowling also realized that the other party was somewhat anxious to get the copyright of the novel. However, she had never been a strong woman and did not dare to wait for a good price. The only condition she put forward was that Firefly must pay her all the copyright fees immediately after the contract was signed. Jessica was going to be 4 years old soon. She hoped that her daughter could receive good preschool education, but this was definitely not possible without money. Therefore, both parties signed the contract in just a week. Originally, she thought that the matter was over, but after signing the contract, the representative of Firefly Group hoped that she could come to London, claiming that Eric Williams wanted to talk to her. Eric Williams. The black Mercedes-Benz car stopped at an entrance for a moment. The driver showed his pass, and the guard seemed to have talked to someone on the phone before they were allowed to enter. Looking at the luxurious castle-style villas on both sides of the street, shaded by trees, Joe and Rowling nervously squeezed the handbag that had been on her lap. She felt even more uneasy. Her previous experience of being rejected by several publishers had severely damaged her self-confidence. Now, she had received a check for £1,000,000 from Firefly Group, but the psychological burden was even greater. What if the novel was not well received and did not sell well after it was published in the future? What would she do? The car drove for a short distance and entered the courtyard of a villa. Through the car window, Joe and Rowling could already see a man and a woman waiting in the courtyard. Although the man was dressed casually, the man was obviously Eric Williams. As for the girl beside him, Joe and Rowling could not recognize her. She did not seem to be Drew Barrymore, the girl who was rumored to be very close to Eric Williams. The car came to a stop. Joe and Rowling reached out to open the door and get out of the car. When she saw the driver get out of the car and turn around, she immediately understood something. She awkwardly retracted her hand and patiently sat down. She waited for the driver to open the door before she carefully walked out. Just as she stood still, Joe and Rowling felt Eric reach out to her. "Madam Rowling, I'm very happy to have you here." "Hello, Mr. Williams." Joe and Rowling quickly reached out to shake his hand. At the same time, she carefully raised her head to look at his young and handsome face. Then she blushed and lowered her head. She felt that it was inappropriate to do so, so she forced herself to raise her head again. "This is Christina. You can call her Chris or Tina." Eric introduced the girl beside him. Christina could feel Joe and Rowling's nervousness. She took the initiative to reach out and said, "Madam Rowling, I've read your novel. It's very interesting." Joe and Rowling shook hands with Christina and said, "Oh, thank you." Chapter 891. Eric could sense Rowling's nervousness and apprehension. He did not take her to the villa's reception room, but to the backyard's lawn instead. In July, the daytime temperature in London was only about 20 degrees Celsius. Above the courtyard surrounded by green trees was a grayish-blue sky. Although it was not as sunny as Los Angeles, it was not as stuffy as the midsummer heat. Amidst the exuberant vitality, there was no unbearable restlessness. There was a set of table and chairs for resting on the lawn. Eric took Joe and Rowling to sit down together. Christina brought a pot of coffee and poured it for the two of them. Then, she turned around and returned to the villa. The information about Joe and Rowling and Harry Potter had been placed on the table in front of him. Sensing Joe and Rowling's emotions, Eric was not in a hurry to talk about business. He said casually, "J.K. Rowling, J should be the first letter of your name. What about K?" Joe and Rowling, who had just picked up her coffee cup with Eric's movements, immediately put down her cup when she heard his question. She explained, "K means Catherine. I don't have a middle name. Catherine is my grandmother's name." Eric felt that the pitiful little woman in front of him must have been confused by the recent series of events. He thought for a while and said, "You know, Joe, in fact, Hollywood is a place that can easily make people lose their minds." Feeling that her apprehension was seen through by Eric, Rowling was a little embarrassed. She did not know what to say, so she just nodded gently. Eric did not expect any response from the woman. He continued, "In Hollywood, someone bought a script for $250,000. The production cost was $15 million, but the global box office was $120 million. The box office earnings were 8 times the production cost. The movie was called Lethal Weapon. Another person bought a script for $1.75 million and used $85 million to produce it. In the end, the box office failed miserably, and even the production company almost went bankrupt. The movie was called Phantom Hero. And, what's more interesting is that the screenwriter of these 2 movies is the same person." Rowling listened attentively to Eric's words. She seemed to have understood something, but she shook her head and said softly, "Mr. Williams, I don't quite understand." "Call me Eric." Eric took a sip of his coffee and said, "I just want to tell you that in Hollywood, or anywhere else, if a person wants to live an easy life, he or she should live boldly. Like I just said, the screenwriter of the 2 movies, his name is Shane Black. Warner Brothers, the producer of Lethal Weapon, had earned at least $100 million from the global box office and subsequent video sales. Shane Black had only received a paltry $250,000. Some people might have thought that he was so sad that he wanted to cry. Later, when Carlock Pictures bought his Phantom Hero script at a high price of $1.75 million and almost went bankrupt because of it, some people felt that as the screenwriter, Shane Black should also feel uneasy. But that's not the case. Shane Black has always been doing well. He's still a gold medal screenwriter in Hollywood, and he continues to work with Warner Brothers on Lethal Weapon 4. Perhaps Eric's words had an effect. Rowling, who was sitting opposite him, sat up slightly. However, after looking at Eric's eyes for a short second, the woman quickly looked away without confidence. Eric smiled and said, "About Harry Potter, in fact, I could have given you a lower price. For example, £100,000. This is the average price of most scripts or novel copyrights. But I didn't do that because I'm optimistic about this story. I want to make it a well-known fantasy brand under Disney, or even like Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck. So, I gave you a price that I think is worth it. In the future, not only will this series be limited to novels and movies, but it will also include music, toys, theme parks, and other entire industry chains. If it succeeds, Firefly Group will make a profit of $1 billion or even $10 billion from this brand." Jo and Rowling, who had just picked up her coffee cup, heard Eric's description. Her hand holding the cup couldn't help but tremble. She put down the coffee cup again and looked at Eric in surprise. Looking at the woman's appearance, Eric chuckled and said, "Now do you feel that if Firefly really uses this novel to make $10 billion, and you only get £1 million, maybe a few £1,000,000 for the entire series, you will suffer a loss?" Jo and Rowling just felt that the prospects described by Eric were a bit unbelievable. Hearing him say this, she couldn't help but feel that she was at a disadvantage. She instinctively wanted to deny it, but facing Eric's bright eyes, she nodded gently. "See, a lot of things are like this. I just said that if a person wants to live an easy life, they should live more confidently. But the most important thing is to not blindly overestimate your own importance in certain things." Jo and Rowling heard Eric's implied words and quickly shook her head and denied, Eric, I didn't." "Well, if Firefly wants to complete this plan, you still need to continue to write the next story. So, I'll talk about my plan first." Eric ignored the woman's denial and said, "First of all, HarperCollins will take over the global distribution of the Harry Potter series. In order to build enough popularity for this series before the movie is produced, Firefly Group will also use as much media resources as possible to package this novel. Perhaps other novels in the same genre can be considered a bestseller if they sell hundreds of thousands of copies, but I hope that the sales scale of the Harry Potter series will be in the tens of millions, or even more. In this process, you will get what you deserve. If the novel sells 10 million copies, you will become a multimillionaire. If the sales scale of the entire series reaches 100 million, you will become a billionaire. But then, the profits from the Harry Potter movies, toys, and theme park peripherals are what Firefly deserves. Joanne Rowling was not stupid. She understood the meaning of Eric's words. If Firefly did not use its own media resources to brand this novel, Harry Potter could only sell hundreds of thousands of copies at most like those ordinary bestsellers and bring her hundreds of thousands of pounds in royalties. Perhaps she could make some more money by selling film and television rights, but it would definitely not reach the glory that Eric described. Thinking of this, some of the imbalance in Joanne Rowling's heart began to dissipate. However, she still asked carefully, "Then Eric, what if it fails?" Eric shrugged. Firefly's annual budget for film and television production is more than $1 billion. At least 8% of it is spent on acquiring scripts or the rights to adapt novels, comics, and television. So, even if it fails, it doesn't matter. Joanne Rowling did not dwell on this issue. £1 million may be a huge sum of money to her, but to Firefly Group, it was nothing. Eric saw that Rowling had relaxed and smiled as he opened the folder in front of him. He said, "Now, let's talk about the content of the novel. I've seen your novel outline. You plan to write 5 novels, but I think 7 would be more appropriate. I've already thought of the titles for the 7 novels for you. You've already completed the first manuscript. I hope that you can split the last tens of thousands of words into 2 parts and use them as the content of the second novel. The first novel will be called Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, according to the content." When Joanne Rowling heard that Eric was going to take action on her novel without asking for her opinion at all, she opened her mouth and felt that she needed to express her insistence as the original author of the novel. However, when she saw Eric look over and raise the pencil in his hand to point to her side, indicating for her to sit there, the resistance that had just arisen in the woman's heart suddenly disappeared. She obediently lifted the chair and sat next to Eric. Although the tone of the man in front of her was always gentle during their conversation, the aura cultivated by the other party's power and wealth was not something that a little woman like her could resist. In addition to the revision of the first book, Eric and Rowling discussed in detail some details of the novel's outline that needed to be revised based on the movie plot in his memory. Time passed unknowingly. By the time they finished discussing things, it was already evening. "Then, you have a month to revise the story of the first book. The subsequent publishing work will be handled by HarperCollins Publishing House. Firefly will also cooperate." Eric looked at his watch and looked up at Rowling next to him. "It's getting late. I'll get someone to arrange a guest room for you. It just so happens that Concubine Dye is holding a charity reception tonight. You can also go and take a look." Since she had been sitting next to Eric for a long time, the man's aura inevitably made Rowling feel a little restless. Young, rich, handsome, strong. Almost every characteristic of this man had a strong attraction to women. Moreover, she had been single for a long time. Although Eric looked as if he did not feel anything, Rowling could not deceive herself. She could imagine that her face was probably blushing. When she heard that Eric wanted her to stay the night in the villa, Rowling finally showed a panicked look. She quickly shook her head and said, No, Eric, I've already booked a flight back to Edinburgh tonight. Jessica is still at a friend's house. I'm worried." Eric looked at the woman a few times and saw her body unconsciously move back in her chair. He could not help but laugh. "Well, it seems that I scared you." Although Rowling knew that Eric was joking with her, she quickly shook her head. "No, really not." "Oh, in that case, I'll get someone to send you to the airport." Eric did not urge her to stay. Rowling could only be considered a woman with a temperament and was completely not his cup of tea. After tidying up the stacks of documents in front of him and handing them to Rowling, Eric got up and walked out. Rowling hugged the documents in her arms and followed behind Eric. She lowered her eyes slightly and started to regret her rejection just now. The chauffeur drove Rowling out of the villa. Christina, who was standing next to Eric, looked at the door that automatically closed with a quick-witted look. Then, she turned to look at Eric. Eric reached out and patted the girl's head. "What are you thinking about?" Nothing." Christina hugged Eric's arm and said, "It's getting late." "Eric, I've picked out a dress for you. It's only 6 o'clock, what's the rush? Eric shook his head and smiled. Go make something to eat first. If you go there on an empty stomach, you'll definitely starve for the whole night. The box office data from yesterday should have been sent over. I'll go take a look. Christina obediently went to the kitchen to prepare food. Eric went back to the study and turned on his computer to check his email. Yesterday was Friday. Casino Royale had entered its second week of screening. At the same time, the super high box office of $117 million in the first week caught the attention of the entire Hollywood. Even Eric himself did not expect the box office of Casino Royale to be so heaven-defying in the first week. But then, there was a problem. The two new movies that were released this week, Jedi Cop 2 and Ice Age, were very closely related to Firefly. The reason why such a schedule was arranged was because the 007 series did not have a very high box office in North America in the past, so there would not be a strong competitive relationship between the parties. But now, many people, including Eric, were a little conflicted. On one hand, everyone hoped that Casino Royale would drop as low as possible in the next week. Due to the movie's reputation among the media and the audience this week, the possibility of Casino Royale maintaining a low drop was very high. On the other hand, the box office of Casino Royale was as high as $117 million in the first week, even surpassing the $106 million of the last movie GoldenEye in North America. Therefore, if the box office of Casino Royale fell too low, the two new movies, Jedi Cop 2 and Ice Age, would be directly affected. Eric smiled bitterly and shook his head. He then opened the box office statistics email from Los Angeles. On yesterday's Friday box office rankings, Casino Royale was unsurprisingly at the top with $61 million. It only dropped 39% compared to last week. The data was sent by Eric's assistant office, and it was accompanied by professional annotations. In the accompanying analysis, due to the popularity of Casino Royale rising along with the box office and reputation, the weekday box office ratio also increased significantly compared to other movies. According to the box office data of Casino Royale on the second week, the overall drop for this week would be about 35%. This meant that the box office of Casino Royale in the second week would still be around $76 million. The beginning of July was the peak period for the North American box office. The box office in North America was around $200 million. However, although Casino Royale was in its second week, it still took a third of the total box office. Without looking further, Eric could already guess that the box office of other movies, especially live-action movies, would not be too good. $117 million in the first week and $76 million in the second week. In 2 weeks, the box office of Casino Royale would exceed $190 million. Although live-action movies could not maintain the longevity of animated movies, even with an average weekly drop of 40%, the final box office of Casino Royale in North America was estimated to be between $300 million to $350 million. The average ticket price in North America in the 1960s was around $0.8. The average ticket price in 1997 was $4.6, which was 5.7 times more than the ticket price in the 1960s. Goldfinger, which was once known as the highest-grossing sequel in the history of 007 after accounting for inflation in 1964, had a box office of more than $51 million in North America, which was only $290 million now. Casino Royale was expected to be between $300 million to $350 million. Even after accounting for inflation, it would definitely replace Goldfinger as the highest-grossing sequel in the history of 007 in North America. As for overseas, due to the difficulty of calculating the box office, the preliminary results for last week's box office were delayed by a day. Although Eric's last movie was 4 years ago, the record of Jurassic Park, breaking the record of $1 billion for the first time, was still fresh in their minds. Driven by the interest, producers from all over the world tried their best to promote the simultaneous release of Casino Royale. In the end, the movie had 36 simultaneous overseas tickets. Last week, led by the record-breaking £21.3 million in the UK, the cumulative box office of the 36 simultaneous release overseas also successfully broke the $100 million mark, reaching $136.1 million. Although the overseas box office market was affected by various factors and the box office data was difficult to predict, there was no doubt that Casino Royale would be Eric's second movie after Jurassic Park that was expected to hit $1 billion at the global box office. Unlike Jurassic Park, before the release of Casino Royale, Eric's box office forecast for this movie had always been about $600 million. Now that the movie suddenly showed the potential of $1 billion worldwide, it would be a lie to say that he was not excited at all. However, after glancing at the box office data of the next few movies, Eric could not help but think that the senior management of his company would not be in a good mood. Last week, when the box office of Casino Royale was released for the first weekend, Eric and Frank Wells, who was far away in Los Angeles, were talking about the upcoming Titanic exhibition over the phone. When Frank Wells mentioned Casino Royale, he sounded very bitter. Regarding the two new movies that week, before the release, the industry was generally more optimistic about the first movie, Jedi Cop 2, which had a base of popularity. The first movie, under the operation of New Line Cinema, had a global box office of close to $200 million. As a result, the production cost of Jedi Cop 2 rose from $19 million to $60 million. However, on Friday, the second movie was not Jedi Cop 2, but Blue Sky Studios' Ice Age. Before the release of this animated movie, it had accumulated a good reputation and was regarded as the animated version of Three Stay-at-Home Fathers and a Baby. Three Stay-at-Home Fathers and a Baby was the box office champion in North America in 1987. The fact that Ice Age could receive such a rating indirectly showed the popularity of this animated movie during the test screening stage. The plot of the first Ice Age was, to a large extent, based on the concept of three stay-at-home fathers and a baby. Moreover, this plot model not only won the praise of the critics, but also the approval of the audience. On the first day of release, Ice Age received $13.46 million at the box office. Although it could not be compared to the $20 million of Finding Nemo on the first day, the box office on the first day exceeded the $12.8 million of Lion King 2 a month ago. It was estimated that the box office of Ice Age would be close to $60 million in the first week, which would also exceed Lion King 2 in the same period. In Eric's opinion, the quality of Lion King 2 was actually better than the more humanized Ice Age. The reason why the box office was surpassed by Ice Age on the first day was because the promotion of Lion King 2 was restricted by the cooperation of Firefly and Fox. Viacom began to open acquisition negotiations with CBS at the end of June. Obviously, Lei Shedong was determined to make up for Viacom's shortcomings in television channels. After Ice Age, the box office of Jedi Cop 2 was only $6.52 million on the first day, barely ranking third. The reason why it was barely ranking third was because the fourth-place Ocean Capital was in its fourth week of release, but the box office on Friday was still as high as $6.29 million. The difference between the two box office figures was only $200,000. $6.52 million on the first day indicated that the box office of Jedi Cop 2 would only be around $25 million. The actual box office figure was even $10 million lower than New Line's initial expectations. Obviously, the difference of $10 million was mostly due to the strong box office of Casino Royale in the second week. Both movies were action movies, so their audiences overlapped to a large extent. Casino Royale's reputation and box office both exploded, and its popularity skyrocketed. On the other hand, Jedi Cop 2 was a movie with a black protagonist. There was not much suspense at all as to which movie the audience would choose when the two were competing. Without Casino Royale, even if the box office of Casino Royale was not that amazing, with the reputation and popularity of the first movie, Jedi Cop 2 would not have a problem breaking the $100 million US box office in North America. However, based on the estimated US $25 million in the first week, the North American box office of Jedi Cop 2 would probably only reach around US $70 million. Due to the weakness of films with black protagonists in the overseas market, even if the overseas box office could maintain the level of the previous film, the company would not be able to recoup its costs in the box office due to the US $60 million production cost and US $20 million publicity budget. In order to achieve profitability, they could only look forward to the future income from videotapes and TV broadcast rights. It was not difficult to imagine that even if everyone understood that MGM was now a part of Firefly's system, it would be difficult for the senior management of Firefly to accept this reality. Thinking of this, Eric could not help but shake his head. Although he did not have any plans for his next movie, in order to calm everyone's emotions, he had to release the news that his next movie would definitely return to Firefly. Chapter 892. Princess Diana's charity banquet started at 8 o'clock in the evening. After spending an hour dealing with the work emails in the mailbox, Eric and Christina had something to eat, changed into their formal attire, and rushed to Kensington Palace, which was next to Garden Street, 5 minutes early. Night fell and the street lights were just being lit. The black car left Garden Street and took a small detour. It only took less than a kilometer to reach their destination. Girls would always yearn for fairy tales like princes and princesses. Although Christina was precocious, she was no exception. Therefore, she was very excited to be able to see Princess Diana in person. She had even carefully prepared a white Chanel dress for this. After getting out of the car and holding Eric's arm, Christina suddenly remembered that she had neglected a very important matter. She asked softly, "Eric, how should I address the princess consort later? Is it Her Highness?" Diana's title of Her Highness was taken away when she divorced Prince Charles. This girl obviously did not pay attention to this. When Eric saw Christina's serious look, he wanted to deliberately mislead her. However, thinking that it was not appropriate for such an occasion, he reminded her, "You can just call her Madam." Christina nodded and said, "Oh, but I think Her Highness is more polite." Eric smiled and said, "It's impolite if you really say that. She might even feel offended." Christina was a little confused. She quickly stuck out her little tongue and hummed softly. As the two of them were talking, Diana and another middle-aged man in a light gray suit came over to greet them. "Good evening, Eric. It's nice to meet you." Diana smiled charmingly and reached out her hand to Eric. Eric shook hands with her and nodded slightly. He said, "It's nice to meet you too, madam." "Diana, just call me Diana," Princess Diana emphasized. She then looked at Christina and said, "And this is?" Eric gave a simple introduction. "Her name is Christina Aguilera." "Hello, Tina," Diana greeted Christina before introducing the middle-aged man beside her. "Eric, this is Dodie Fade." Eric had already begun to look at the middle-aged man in front of him. He was about 40 years old. Although his Arabian appearance was not obvious, some typical features between his eyebrows were easy to distinguish. As most of the British media had been hyping Diana's new relationship recently, Eric also learned some information about the other party from the newspapers. What was interesting was that Dodie Fade claimed that he was a filmmaker, and he was the executive producer of Spielberg's Captain F***** a few years ago. After hearing Diana's introduction, Eric extended his hand and greeted her with a smile. However, Eric didn't know if it was an illusion, but he felt that Dodie Fade's gaze seemed to be a little wary of him. His attitude wasn't very friendly either. After a brief moment of doubt, Eric could not help but laugh in his heart. It seemed that Dodie Fade had mistaken him for one of those billionaires who approached Diana with certain motives. Moreover, Eric seemed to have an advantage that Dodie Fade could not compare to in terms of wealth, power, and even appearance and age. It was inevitable that the other party would feel threatened. Diana obviously did not sense Dodie Fade's hostility towards Eric. After the two of them greeted each other, they walked into the banquet hall together. However, she led Eric directly to a small donation box and looked at him with her bright blue eyes. Eric smiled. He felt that this princess consort with a straightforward personality was rather cute, so he did not mind. He took out his checkbook and signed a check for $100,000 before dropping it into the donation box. Diana waited for Eric to drop the check into the donation box before she said with a smile, "Eric, thank you for your generosity. There are too many people in this world who need help." "It's okay, this is what I should do." Eric nodded, ignoring Dodie Fade, who had been staring at him signing the checkbook and then showing a disapproving look. The invitation to the banquet stipulated that the guests had to donate at least £5,000. Eric did not have the intention to spend a lot of money to make the beauty smile. Based on his understanding of this kind of party, $100,000 was likely to be the largest donation at this banquet. There were countless charity events in Western society. Unless there was a special purpose, no rich person would casually donate more than $1 million. Although Eric could afford it, he would not put himself in the limelight. "Then, please come with me, Eric. I'll introduce you to some guests. They are looking forward to seeing you," Diana said as she made a gesture of invitation and walked side by side with Eric. She paused and said, "Speaking of which, Eric, I'm a fan of yours." Eric heard that Diana liked pop music very much. This seemed to be something that Prince Charles, who advocated entertainment activities in the upper class, hated deeply. He smiled and asked, "Which song do you like best?" Diana looked over and said with a smile, "Why don't you guess?" Stronger? Diana shook her head and said, "No, guess again." "New Divide?" "This is also a great song, but it's not," Diana continued to deny. Then she chuckled and said, "Well, I'll tell you directly. It's Young and Beautiful. I like the feeling of beauty and disillusionment expressed by this song. It makes people sad, but also intoxicated." Eric looked at the beautiful woman beside him who was still in her prime. He was startled and shook his head gently. He said, "No, you shouldn't like this song." "Ah, why?" Diana was very puzzled. Eric opened his mouth, then shook his head and said, "Nothing." Diana did not continue to ask. She hesitated and said, "Speaking of which, Eric, this may be a bit abrupt, but can you sing a song for everyone later?" "If it's for you, of course, no problem." Eric nodded respectfully. If it was someone else who made such a request to him, he would naturally stay away. However, he did not want to reject the small request of the woman in front of him. Seeing that Diana looked over with shyness and joy, Eric said, "However, I've never received vocal training. Live performances are terrible. Let Chris do it. She'll sing your favorite song, Young and Beautiful." Diana did not have high expectations when she made the request. However, when she heard that Eric wanted Christina to sing, she looked at the little girl who was holding onto Eric's arm like a little bird. Her eyes were filled with surprise and doubt. It was hard to believe that Christina could sing a song that was full of vicissitudes like Young and Beautiful. Eric saw through Diana's thoughts and explained, "Don't underestimate Chris. She's been performing since she was 8 years old. In terms of singing, she's definitely 100 times better than me." "Oh, all right then." Diana nodded when she heard Eric's words. She turned her head and ordered the entourage behind her to make preparations. Then, she introduced some of the important guests to Eric. Soon, it was 8 o'clock in the evening. There were about 200 guests in the banquet hall. After Diana introduced a few guests to Eric, she walked to the small stage in the banquet hall and gave a simple speech. After that, the banquet officially began. This type of banquet was not only to raise money for charity, but also to provide an opportunity for the guests to expand their social network. Eric skillfully dealt with the guests who approached him. He thought that he would not be able to gain anything tonight, but to his surprise, he found someone who piqued his interest. It was Simon Fuller, the owner of a music entertainment company. In the original space-time, many people might not have heard of the name Simon Fuller, but almost everyone knew about the popular Spice Girls and the long-lasting American Idol. Both of them were created by Simon Fuller. However, after chatting with Simon Fuller for a while, Eric recalled the information in his mind and suddenly realized something. Where was the Spice Girls? It was already 1997. According to history, this was the time when the Spice Girls soared to the top. However, Eric did not see any information about the Spice Girls. Moreover, it was after the breakup with the Spice Girls that Simon Fuller came up with the idea of creating a music reality show. It went out of control. Other than the most famous American Idol, Simon Fuller's Pop Idol talent show had appeared in more than 70 countries during its heyday. Chapter 893. Simon Fuller noticed Eric's distracted expression again. He hesitated, not knowing if he should take the initiative to walk away, but he was very reluctant. Meeting Eric at this party was a complete surprise for him. Although Firefly Group's record business happened to be the shortcoming of this media group, in Simon Fuller's view, this was exactly an opportunity. Based on his many years of experience in dealing with people, he realized that Eric must be interested in him. Otherwise, the other party would not have chatted with him for so long. However, this young super tycoon was a little absent-minded during the conversation, as if he suddenly remembered something. Considering that perhaps his topic about the record production process did not interest the other party, Simon Fuller was about to talk about Eric's recent Casino Royale, when Diana walked through the crowd towards them, followed by her boyfriend, Dodie Fade. Noticing that Simon Fuller was standing next to Eric, Diana nodded to him politely, and then said to Eric, who came back to his senses, "Hey, Eric, it's time for the performance. Also, Tina, are you ready?" Christina glanced at Eric, then nodded to Diana and said, "Of course, ma'am, I'm ready any time." "In that case," Diana said to the attendant behind her, "Paul, take Miss Aguilera to get ready." Watching her attendant take Christina away, Diana turned to Eric and Simon Fuller and asked with a smile, "So, what were you guys talking about just now?" Simon Fuller was not sure if Eric had the intention to get close to Diana, so he was very sensible and did not take the initiative to talk. Seeing that Simon Fuller did not answer, Eric said with a smile, "Some questions about record production. Simon is a very excellent music producer, and I happen to be interested in these, so we just chatted casually." Diana was also interested, but with some regret, she said, "Speaking of which, I have always dreamed of being able to produce a record of my own. Unfortunately, there has never been such an opportunity." Eric said, "If you want, I can help you." "Really?" Diana looked at Eric with a smile and said, "Eric, I'll take it seriously." Eric looked at Diana's face that did not show any signs of aging and nodded with certainty. "Of course, if you want, we can get someone to prepare it for you tomorrow." Dodie Fade was already a little dissatisfied with being ignored. Sensing that Eric was obviously beginning to poach him, he quickly moved closer to Diana and said in a gentle tone, "Dear, Mr. Williams is a very busy person. If you're interested in making records, I actually know some music producers as well." When Diana heard Dodie Fade's words, she immediately realized that he and Eric seemed to be at loggerheads with each other. She blushed slightly and shook her head. "Forget it. Actually, my singing is terrible too." As they chatted, on the stage of the banquet hall, as the dance song ended, the host went on stage to introduce Christina's next performance. Amidst the applause of the guests, the girl walked onto the stage and the lights in the hall dimmed. Some of the guests at the banquet had already watched Casino Royale and recognized Christina on the stage. Many of them were surprised, obviously doubting whether the little vase in Casino Royale could sing the charm of Young and Beautiful. Eric, on the other hand, was not worried about that at all. Although she came from an unorthodox background, in terms of singing skills, there were not many people in the music industry who could surpass Christina. Although she was better at the high notes, her bass level was definitely better than most professional singers. Sure enough, after the slow prelude, when a hoarse and slightly decadent voice sounded in the hall, the people who were originally skeptical were all surprised. Some of them even looked in Eric's direction. Naturally, they knew that Christina came with Eric. "Oh, that's amazing. It's really, really beautiful, unbelievable," Diana exclaimed in surprise. She turned her head to look at Eric, but she immediately turned her attention back to Christina, who was not far away. Eric held a glass of red wine in his hand and listened to Christina's singing. Then, he remembered some of the thoughts in his mind when he met Simon Fuller. Although Firefly Group's expansion had reached a bottleneck, Eric still had no intention of expanding the recording business. It was an industry that was destined to decline. Although the recording industry could not completely die out in the West where copyright protection was very strict, if he invested heavily now, he would only lose everything in the future. Moreover, if he could completely replace the traditional portable music player, the future output of the MP3 player could even be comparable to the entire recording industry. All the arrangements related to the music field in Firefly's system were to provide the hardware product, the MP3 player, with more complete content and functional services. The technical difficulty of the digital music player was not high. Even if he had to completely bypass the patent barrier set by Firefly Electronics, some of the more established electronics giants could launch a similar product within 2 years. However, as long as Firefly created a complete software and hardware service system around the MP3 player, allowing users to experience far more convenience than other similar products in all aspects, from accessing content to purchasing and paying, other manufacturers would be doomed to wishful thinking if they wanted to use similar products to threaten the MP3 player's position. However, since he thought of the Spice Girls and American Idol, Eric naturally would not let them go. He had already spoken to the 2 people in charge of Firefly Electronics during the day. The Firefly player would enter the European market in spring next year. Now that he had created the Spice Girls, if they could achieve the influence of the original Spacetime, this group could also be a great help in promoting the Fireflyer in Europe. As for American Idol, or the reality show Pop Idol, not only could it bring high ratings to the TV station in his hands, but it could also further promote the player to the whole world if it was bundled with the Fireflyers title. However, the current Fireflyers production capacity was not enough to support its worldwide expansion, so Eric planned to postpone the production of Pop Idol. This was also the right time to create the Spice Girls. Of course, in order to achieve this, he still needed a person in charge. Simon Fuller was naturally the most suitable person. With this thought in mind, Eric said to Simon Fuller, who was still standing next to him, "Simon, did you just say that you have a record company?" Simon Fuller, who was also immersed in Christina's song, immediately perked up when he heard this. He nodded and said, "Yes, Eric, my company is called 19 Entertainment." After all, Firefly had a record company. Eric naturally understood that Simon Fuller's record company was more similar to those independent film companies in Hollywood that were as numerous as the hairs on a cow. These companies usually chose to be affiliated with some large record companies. Sometimes, they would even sell some of their shares to the other party. Then, they would use the method of cooperation to package some singers for their operations. Since Eric wanted to hand over the plan to create the Spice Girls and Pop Idol to Simon Fuller, he naturally had to take control of the other party's record company first. So, he asked again, "Do you still have the shares of this company?" "Of course." Simon Fuller nodded again. 19 Entertainment was founded by him in 1985. However, for more than 10 years, although it was barely operating, it had never produced any outstanding singers. Naturally, there would not be any large record companies interested in his small company. When Eric heard the other party's affirmative answer, he took out a business card from his pocket and handed it over. He said, "Then, I recently wanted to create a band and I need someone to implement it. Think about it. If you're willing, Firefly will buy your company, and then you can be in charge of this project." Simon Fuller took the business card respectfully. However, when he thought that once his company was bought, he would be demoted from a boss to an employee in the blink of an eye. Although he did not have much hope, he still said, "Eric, can I keep some shares?" "Shares are not allowed, but I will give you enough options." Eric shook his head. In his memory, Simon Fuller played a very important role in the creation of the Spice Girls and the Pop Idol. However, not only was he kicked out of the Spice Girls very quickly, but he was also gradually kicked out of the Spice Girls later on in American Idol and other shows. Thinking about it this way, this person's creativity should be good, but he definitely lacked enough execution power. In addition, Eric wasn't familiar with Simon Fuller, so naturally, he wouldn't give him shares from the beginning. In fact, Simon Fuller had made up his mind that he would not let go of this opportunity. After all, this was Eric Williams. How many people in the world had the opportunity to directly cooperate with Eric Williams? Who did not have a meteoric rise after cooperating with him? It would be crazy to let go of this opportunity. However, since his request to keep his shares was rejected, he did not want to appear too eager. He said, "Then Eric, I'll think about it and get back to you tomorrow." Eric nodded and said, "No problem, I'll wait for your good news." The two continued to chat until Christina's performance on the stage ended. The banquet hall was filled with applause that was many times louder than the beginning. As the lights in the hall lit up again, Simon Fuller looked at Christina, who was walking towards him, and Diana, who was still standing on the other side of Eric. He did not stay any longer. He raised his glass to Eric and walked away. Hearing the praises from the people around her, Christina walked to Eric's side with a blushing face. However, before she could hear Eric's praise, Diana grabbed her little hand and pulled her to her side. "Tina, I didn't expect you to be so amazing." Eric looked at Diana, who was talking to Christina intimately while ignoring him. He did not mind and took a glass of wine from a passing waiter. Just as he was about to chat with the other guests, Dodie Fade walked over. Dodie Fade looked at Christina's petite figure without hiding anything and said to Eric, "She's a very good girl, isn't she?" Eric raised his eyebrows and nodded. "Of course." "In that case," Dodie Fade lowered his voice and said, "Eric, you shouldn't approach Diana anymore." Eric looked at the two women who were holding each other intimately and turned to walk towards the buffet table with fewer people not far away. When Dodie Fade saw that Eric ignored him, he reluctantly followed him. He copied Eric's actions and took the tray to pick up the food. Eric put a small piece of cake on his tray. When he saw that Dodie Fade still wanted to say something, he spoke first. "So, you're serious about her?" "Of course." Dodie Fade nodded without hesitation and said, "I've already planned to propose to her." "Heh." Eric laughed and said, "Speaking of which, you grew up in England, right?" Dodie Fade saw that Eric suddenly changed the topic and asked warily, "Is there a problem?" Due to its open financial market and special tax system, London was the city that billionaires from all over the world liked to live in the most. Many rich families from the Middle East and Russia lived here most of the time. Many of them even chose to emigrate. Their children grew up and were educated in England. Therefore, many rich children grew up under the influence of English culture and basically thought of themselves as English. Eric guessed that Dodie Fade was probably the same for him from his standard London accent. "Of course it's nothing." Eric shook his head and said with a smile, "However, maybe you already think of yourself as a pure English person, but some people don't think so." Dodie Fade shrugged indifferently. "I don't care what other people think." Eric looked at him sympathetically and said, "Yes, maybe you don't care, but if you plan to marry the Princess of Wales, someone will care, and they care a lot." Dodie Fade paused and turned to stare at Eric. He said, "Are you hinting at something?" Eric did not mind Dodie Fade's gaze at all. He continued to pick some fruit salad for himself. Then, he glanced at Dodie and pretended to be surprised. He said as if he was talking to himself, "Unbelievable, you actually understood that I was hinting at something." After saying that, Eric left Dodie Fade, who was in a daze, and walked towards Christina. He sighed in his heart. In the end, he still couldn't help but intervene. He just didn't know if Dodie Fade would be able to figure it out. Looking at Eric's departing figure, Dodie Fade, who was standing at the buffet table, had a variety of expressions on his face. Eric had almost written the words "How can someone as stupid as you understand my hinting?" on his face. Although he was extremely angry, he could not forget what Eric said just now. After hesitating for a while, Dodie Fade threw away the plate in his hand and left the banquet hall alone. He went to the garden outside the hall and looked around. Then, he took out his mobile phone and dialed his father, Muhammad Al-Fade's number. Eric's words made him feel an inexplicable sense of danger. However, a few words that did not make sense were not enough for him to sort out the situation. Therefore, he instinctively felt that perhaps he should inform his father about this matter. After saying those words to Dodie Fade, Eric was no longer in the mood to continue staying at the banquet. After bidding farewell to Diana, he left early with Christina. Early the next morning, Eric was having breakfast with Christina on the lawn in the backyard when the villa's doorbell rang urgently. "Eric, I'll do it." Christina, who was sitting opposite him, immediately stood up and volunteered to open the door. Eric thought that it was Peter Ritchie, so he did not pay much attention to it. However, a moment later, Christina walked over with Diana. Eric had just stood up in surprise when Diana, whose eyes were red and her face was haggard, asked angrily, "Eric, did you say something to Dodie?" Eric had a premonition in his heart, but he spread his hands innocently and said, "I don't understand what you're talking about." Hearing Eric's denial, Diana was obviously angrier. Her eyes were wide open as if she wanted to eat Eric up. You bastard. All men are bastards." Eric felt that if it were not for her long-term upbringing, Diana might have reached out and scratched his face. Although the woman did not move, Eric subconsciously took a small step back and said, "Diana, I really don't understand what you're talking about." Diana's anger did not diminish. She said, "Dodie broke up with me last night. He's on the plane back to Egypt now. Are you satisfied now?" Eric heaved an inexplicable sigh of relief, but he did not expect Dodie Fade to be so straightforward. Perhaps he had really underestimated him. However, looking at Diana's angry look, Eric had no choice but to deal with the problem at hand. He said seriously, "Miss Spencer, I don't understand what you're talking about, and I'm not interested in the matter between you and your boyfriend. If there's nothing else, please leave." "Ha, you hypocrite." Diana sneered and looked at Eric with disdain. She said, "Didn't you chase Dodie away to get close to me? Now, you're actually asking me to leave. Ha, that's ridiculous. I'm not leaving, and I'm telling you clearly that you'll never succeed. I hate you, you bastard." Eric could not help but smile bitterly in his heart. He did not expect this woman to have such a hysterical side. Looking at Diana, who seemed to be going crazy and still wanted to be in a stalemate with him, Eric had no choice but to be patient. He said, "I've said it before, Miss Spencer, I don't know what happened. You were dumped by your boyfriend, and it has nothing to do with me. Now, please leave, or I'll call the security." Diana did not seem to care about anything. She raised her voice and said, "Then go ahead and call. Make a big deal out of it and let everyone see what a bastard like you has done." Eric slapped his forehead with a headache. Seeing this woman's look of, "Fight me if you have the ability," he was furious. Although he could never say it out loud, he should have saved her life. What was going on now? After looking at Diana for a moment, Eric lost his patience. He threw the coffee cup that he had forgotten to put down on the table beside him and suddenly took 2 steps forward. Before Diana could react, he carried the woman up and walked out. "Ah, you bastard, what are you doing? Put me down, help." Diana felt the world spinning before her eyes. She realized her situation and immediately struggled violently. She screamed for help at the top of her lungs while hitting Eric's back with all her might. However, how could the frail woman compete with Eric? In the blink of an eye, the two of them had already passed through the villa and arrived at the front yard. Diana's chauffeur heard the commotion and ran in with a surprised look. Eric walked to the front door, carried the woman down from his shoulder, and threw her onto the lawn outside the door. Ignoring the woman's frantic screams outside the door, Eric chased the chauffeur out and closed the door. Then, he said to Christina, who ran out after him, "Call the security. Don't let this woman in again." Chapter 894. Kensington Garden Street was the community with the best privacy in London. Although Elizabeth, who was far away in Los Angeles, called excitedly that night to gossip about the cause and effect of Eric throwing Diana out of the door, this incident would only be spread in a very small circle and would not cause any waves. Perhaps because she had calmed down, Diana did not do anything out of line after that. Instead, she quietly flew to Eastern Europe to continue her mind-banning career. What appeared in the media was only the news that the Princess of Wales suddenly fell out of love. Although it was inevitable that some tabloids would publish some suggestive articles, the few most influential tabloids were basically vague about the reason for Diana's breakup, so this matter didn't have much of an impact on Eric. Simon Fuller called the next day and agreed that Firefly would acquire 19 Entertainment, which he had founded. Although it had been established for 12 years, 19 Entertainment had no valuable assets. Some of the singers signed one after another eventually failed silently. Eric did not have any expectations for this company. He was only interested in Simon Fuller's creativity and experience in the record industry. After asking the British branch of Firefly to make a simple assessment of 19 Entertainment, Eric offered a price of $3 million, of which $1 million was used to acquire all the shares of 19 Entertainment, and the other $2 million was used as the startup capital to create the Spice Girls. At the same time, Eric gave Simon Fuller a 5-year cumulative 10% company option in the contract. Knowing that he had no room to bargain with Eric, Simon Fuller did not dwell on these details. What's more, he was very satisfied with the 10% option reward. Although nominally affiliated with Firefly Records, which was affiliated with Firefly Group, because Firefly Records did not have much business in the UK or even Europe, 19 Entertainment merged with Firefly Records, which was almost equivalent to the European branch of Firefly Records. As long as it could get the full support of Firefly Group, 19 Entertainment would definitely develop rapidly. At that time, the 10% option would also increase in value into a very considerable wealth. Compared to the huge scale of Firefly Group, this $3 million acquisition seemed to be not worth mentioning. But when the news of the deal was announced, it was learned that Eric personally promoted this matter behind the scenes. The entire European record industry turned its attention to the originally unknown 19 Entertainment. No one would believe that Firefly's record business in Europe was just a small matter. Some mainstream media also discussed the purpose of Firefly's or Eric's move. Simon Fuller also found that he had suddenly become a popular person in the industry. In the past, the big shots of the old record companies who had ignored him had personally called to inquire about the news. There was also an endless stream of people who came to curry favor with him to seek cooperation. To be honest, the plan to acquire 19 Entertainment and create a Spice Group was indeed just a small matter for Eric. However, most people obviously did not think so, especially when Casino Royale was still dominating the box office worldwide. Even if he did not mention his huge wealth, his influence in the entertainment industry had reached an unprecedented height by producing 2 blockbusters with a global box office of $1 billion in a row. Not only did Katzenberg personally call to ask about Eric's detailed plan, but Barry Weiss, the president of Firefly Records, also wanted to come to the UK in person, but he was stopped by Eric. After spending 2 days discussing the plan to create a Spice Group with Simon Fuller, 19 Entertainment quickly announced in the Times that it was recruiting girls between the ages of 18 and 23 to form a girl group. Unlike the news of Firefly's acquisition of 19 Entertainment, which was limited to the professional field, the recruitment notice in the Times immediately excited countless girls who were looking forward to becoming famous. In just 3 days, 19 Entertainment received more than 1,000 resumes. Some record companies even wanted to directly put their newcomers in the group. For a time, the entire British entertainment industry was boiling. San Francisco, USA. Firefly Electronics' Fireflyer player assembly plant was located in the northern part of Oakland. 3 months ago, Eric transferred Jeff Kleebel from Nokia to be in charge of the supply chain construction and product production of Firefly Electronics. He felt someone patting him and immediately straightened up. Only then did he realize that he had fallen asleep on his desk. It was already July 10th, the day when the planned Fireflyer player officially went on sale. In order to ensure that nothing went wrong, Jeff Kleebel had been staying in the factory for the past few days. A week ago, he had just flown back from Malaysia. In addition to the 2 product assembly plants in the US, Firefly Electronics had also started the construction of a larger Fireflyer factory in Southeast Asia with a monthly capacity of 500,000 units. However, the factory there would take at least 3 months to go into production, and the production capacity would also need a slow ramp-up process. Rubbing his face in a daze, Jeff Kleebel finally saw the 2 people standing in front of him, Victor Mike Nelly and Bill Olson. Victor Mike Nelly even smiled and handed over a breakfast. After a few months of working together, the 3 of them were already very familiar with each other. Jeff Kleebel did not stand on ceremony. He tore open the packaging and took a bite of the sandwich. He quickly swallowed it, then raised his wrist in satisfaction, looked at his watch, and said, "It's already 8:15. Yeah, Victor Mike Nelly nodded and pulled two chairs together with Bill Olson to sit down. He said, "We came over at 7 o'clock. We saw that you were sleeping soundly, so we didn't wake you up." "Oh, then you must have already been to the assembly plant." Jeff Klebel took another bite of the sandwich and said, "Last night was really terrible. An equipment robot malfunctioned and was only fixed at 4 o'clock in the morning. Today, I must have a good talk with Hamada from Epson about this. If he can't give me a satisfactory answer, they can forget about getting the order of 100 equipment robots from Malaysia." Victor Mike Nelly and Bill Olson looked at the young man in his early 30s in front of them who became energetic again after eating a few bites of the sandwich. They were a little envious. 3 months ago, when they saw Jeff Klebel for the first time, both of them doubted whether this young man, who was energetic but had a somewhat jumpy personality, was competent enough to manage the supply chain and product production of Firefly Electronics. However, they no longer had any scruples like before. Under Jeff Klebel's management, in just 3 months, Firefly Electronics' component supply chain and product production line had undergone a complete transformation. Bill Olson listened to Jeff Klebel's complaints and smiled. "Jeff, that's not what we need to focus on today." "Of course." Jeff Klebel nodded and said, "Amazon opens pre-sales at 10 o'clock. There's still an hour and 40 minutes left." Although they decided to open the purchase today, it would still take some time for Firefly's physical distribution to be released. In this case, if they wanted to test the actual market demand of Firefly after 3 months of hunger marketing, Amazon's online store sales data was undoubtedly a very good way to test it. Therefore, Amazon would open pre-sales of Firefly at 10 o'clock in the morning on the West Coast. After the user placed the order online, Amazon would arrange for the delivery within the next 7 to 15 days. Victor Mike Nelly saw Jeff Klebel's relaxed expression and said, "Aren't you nervous at all?" "Why should I be nervous? Also, the two of you don't seem to be nervous." Jeff Klebel smiled and looked at the two of them. He said, "In the first half of the year, the PC sales in North America reached 14.3 million units. This year's PC sales for the whole year is likely to reach 30 million units. These consumers who buy PC are the potential consumers of Firefly. According to this standard, Firefly's potential sales can reach at least 30 million units, which is equivalent to 2.5 million units per month. Even if the factory in Malaysia completes production, our production capacity will only reach 1 million units per month. We can't even satisfy the North American market, let alone the larger overseas market." Victor Mike Nelly looked at Jeff Klebel wolfing down his breakfast. He stood up and said, "All right, since that's the case, let's go out for a walk. The air outside is good. Of course, I want to read today's newspaper." Jeff Klebel said, "Speaking of which, today is Friday. Last week's box office should be out. Guess how much the box office of our boss movie will be this week?" Bill Olson smiled and said, "Unfortunately, I've already seen it." "There's no need to guess, it's—" Jeff Klebel immediately raised a finger and said, "Stop, don't tell me. I'll see it myself." Haha. The three of them chatted and laughed as they left Jeff Klebel's office and walked out. Los Angeles. Santa Monica. In the restaurant, Amy Pascal's husband, Bernard Weintraub, looked at the Hollywood Reporter in his hand and shook his head. "Unbelievable, really unbelievable. The drop is only 34%. It's lower than all the analysts predicted. Based on this trend, the North American box office might even exceed $350 million US. Amy Pascal was sitting on the other side of the table with a newspaper spread out beside her. In the second week of its release, the drop in the box office of Casino Royale was lower than many people expected. It only dropped 34% and earned $77.55 million US. The total box office had reached $195 million US. Affected by Casino Royale, the box office of Ice Age, which was originally predicted to reach $60 million US in its first week, was unfortunately stuck at $57.23 million US. The other new film, Jedi Cop 2, was even more affected. It only made $23.15 million at the box office in its first week, which was US $12 million less than New Line Cinema's initial estimate of US $35 million. Moreover, the film did not even get third place in the weekly box office. Instead, it fell behind Finding Nemo in its fourth week of release. As for Batman and Robin, which was released a week before Casino Royale, it was now a nightmare for Warner Brothers. Due to its poor reputation, after earning $47 million in its first week, the box office of Batman and Robin fell 65% in its second week, earning only $81 million. But that wasn't the end. The industry originally thought that the drop in the box office of Batman and Robin would start to narrow in its third week, but due to the impact of Casino Royale, the box office of Batman and Robin plunged 61% in its third week, leaving it with a pitiful $11 million. After 3 weeks of release, although the box office of Batman and Robin had reached $39 million, based on the current drop, if the box office was cut in half again next week, the box office would be less than $4 million, and the final box office would only be around $95 million. In the end, if Warner Brothers wanted the box office to exceed $100 million, they would have to pay for it themselves. Batman and Robin had a total investment of $125 million, plus a publicity budget of $50 million, which was equivalent to Casino Royale's. Even if the global box office exceeded $200 million, Warner Brothers would only be able to recoup about $90 million. The film's reputation would completely collapse, and the income from videotapes and TV broadcast rights would also be greatly reduced. All in all, Warner Brothers' direct losses on this project could reach $80 million. But that wasn't the most important thing. The more serious consequence was that the Batman brand was completely ruined this time. It would be difficult for Warner Brothers to restart this superhero series for at least 8 to 10 years. Looking at the box office statistics in the newspaper, Amy Pascal thought about these things and replied, "So, what did you say last week? The continuous impact of bad movies will stimulate the market's hunger for high-grossing commercial movies." You're right, a lot of people are also feeling a little incredulous. Bernard Weintraub nodded and said, "So, the next 007 should be released right away, right?" Hearing her husband mention this, Amy Pascal's hand, which was spreading jam on the bread, paused. She smiled bitterly and said, "I'm afraid it won't be that easy." "That's true." Bernard Weintraub smiled and said, "According to Williams' personality, he definitely won't continue to film the next 007. It will take a lot of effort to find a director who can take over this series. Williams has already set up such a good situation. It would be a pity if the next sequel's director isn't good enough and causes the series to be frustrated." "The key isn't the director." Amy Pascal shook her head and said, "The problem is with Brosnan." "About the salary?" Amy Pascal nodded and said, "This is very troublesome now. You should know about Mr. and Mrs. Smith, right?" "Of course." Amy Pascal explained, before Mr. and Mrs. Smith, Pierce could barely be considered a B-list actor. In order to participate in the mainstream blockbuster Mr. and Mrs. Smith, he signed a 3-film package contract with Columbia Pictures, which stipulated that the salary increase for each film could not exceed 50%. In Mr. and Mrs. Smith, Pierce's salary was $3 million. Then, under Eric's push, in order to let Pierce play Bond, the option contract was transferred to MGM. Because the box office of Mr. and Mrs. Smith was very good, in GoldenEye, although Pierce's salary was slightly relaxed, it was only $5 million. Next is Casino Royale. His salary is $7 million. After listening to his wife's description, Bernard Weintraub also understood. According to the salary standards of Hollywood stars, after Mr. and Mrs. Smith, Pierce Brosnan's net worth should have reached $10 million. But due to the restrictions of the contract, he took a low salary for 2 films in a row. Now, the global box office of Casino Royale was close to $1 billion, which pushed the 007 series to unprecedented glory. Brosnan just happened to complete the original 3-film contract. Although everyone knew that the huge success of Casino Royale was basically due to Eric, this did not prevent Brosnan from asking for an exorbitant salary for the next sequel. Bernard Weintraub put down the newspaper in his hand and couldn't help but ask curiously, "How much does he want this time?" Amy Pascal said, $20 million plus 20% of the global box office dividends. There were all kinds of box office sharing rules signed by Hollywood superstars and studios. Bernard Weintraub didn't quite understand, so he continued to ask, "What are the specific rules?" $20 million is very simple. 20% of the global box office dividends is 20% of the remaining profits after the production and distribution costs are deducted. According to Casino Royale's global box office budget of $1 billion, we'll get about $400 million. After deducting the total cost of $165 million, the profit will be $235 million. Pierce wants 20% of the profit. Bernard Weintraub did a simple calculation and couldn't help but gasp. If the next sequel can reach the level of Casino Royale, it will be about $70 million. He really dares to ask for this. Amy Pascal also smiled a little helplessly and said, according to the Agent Movie Universe storyline planned by the company, the next 007 will still be a high point of the entire series. Even if the box office doesn't reach $1 billion worldwide, it won't be far from it. Bernard Weintraub said, "Then what do you plan to do?" Amy Pascal shrugged and said, "Continue to negotiate. It's definitely impossible to get such a high salary." Eric's original rule was that if they wanted to split the profits, the fixed salary could not exceed $10 million. It was said that Cameron and Firefly's Spider-Man contract did not break this limit, and MGM would definitely follow suit. It depends on whether Pierce chooses to take $20 million directly or $10 million plus a share. After all, even if it's a share, we definitely can't give him 20%. Also, it's not like we don't have any bargaining chips. Oh, what is it? Amy Pascal said, Pierce signed a package contract with Columbia Pictures for 3 movies. Similarly, the 007 movie contract with MGM is also for 3 movies. Although there is no limit to the salary for the last movie, if he doesn't complete this movie contract, he can't take on other movies. If there is a stalemate, it won't be good for anyone. Bernard Weintraub said again, but even so, after the next movie, the Agent Movie Universe shouldn't be over yet, right? Yes. Amy Pascal remembered Eric's memo last month and said, "We have also been discussing this problem recently. There must be a solution." Chapter 895. Seattle. In the large conference room at Amazon's headquarters, several executives sat around the conference table and whispered. The wall screen in front of the conference room displayed a series of back-end transaction data for the Firefly player. There were only 5 minutes left until 10 o'clock, and the most eye-catching sales number on the screen was still 0. Jeff Bezos spoke on the phone with a vice president who was responsible for the logistics of the Firefly player in San Francisco. He then hurriedly opened the conference room door and walked in. He sat down in his seat and looked at the big screen on the wall with anticipation. The other senior executives who had been whispering also quieted down, leaving only 2 administrative secretaries who were tiptoeing around to distribute a document. Just like the day 3 months ago when they implemented hunger marketing, today was still a very important day for Amazon. From April until now, Amazon not only gained a lot of attention with the hunger marketing strategy for the Firefly player, but the popularity of the website, the number of registrations, and the sales amount all increased significantly. Before this, the company's first quarter turnover was only $87 million, which was already very impressive for an e-commerce website that was established less than 3 years ago. But in the second quarter, relying on the popularity brought by the marketing strategy for the Firefly player, Amazon's turnover skyrocketed by 77% in 3 months, reaching $154 million. Amazon was responsible for the distribution of 150,000 Firefly players, which contributed nearly $45 million in revenue. Jeff Bezos had always been a very conceited person, but this time, he couldn't help but admire Eric's stroke of genius in the online marketing of the Firefly player. Amazon had already begun IPO negotiations with Morgan Stanley a few months ago. The official listing date was set to be January of next year. In March, Firefly Investments invested another $100 million in Amazon in exchange for a third 5% stake. At that time, the company's valuation was only $2 billion. But now, with the continued rise of the Nasdaq, and more importantly, the explosive growth of Amazon's business in the second quarter, Wall Street's valuation of Amazon doubled to $4 billion in 6 months. Although the outbreak of the economic crisis in Southeast Asia might have a certain impact on the Nasdaq, Jeff Bezos was quite optimistic. In fact, if Amazon could maintain its current high growth rate, the company's future IPO stock price could double compared to its current valuation. The hunger marketing strategy against Fireflyer would undoubtedly greatly help the company's development. If possible, Jeff Bezos really hoped that the hunger marketing for the Fireflyer player would continue until the end of the year, but he also understood that going too far was as bad as falling short. Although hunger marketing could greatly increase the attention and popularity of the website in a short period of time, if users were unable to purchase a product for a long time, their original expectations would gradually turn into disappointment and even disgust. Neither Firefly Electronics nor Amazon wanted to see this happen. Jeff Bezos was thinking about these issues in a trance until the administrative secretary gently patted him on the shoulder. The time on the big screen was already 9:59. Everyone in the conference room put down whatever they were doing and focused on the big screen in front of them. There was no special prompt, nor was there any dramatic scene. Once it was 10 o'clock, the simple yet eye-catching number on the big screen began to jump rapidly. In the last rush before the sale, 5,000 Fireflyer players were sold out in only 37 seconds. However, this time, although the pre-sale was open, the Fireflyer player sales on the screen still broke through the 5,000 unit mark in just 1 minute. It wasn't until 7 minutes later that the pre-sale sales reached 20,000 units that the speed of the transaction slowed down. However, this was only relative. The sales number on the screen was still increasing at a rate of more than 10 units per second. After the first expansion of the Fireflyer player production capacity, Amazon still got a third of the sales share, which was 150,000 units. Based on the sales performance of the previous few months, although it was still expected that the Fireflyer would remain in high demand for a long time to come, Amazon's previous forecast of 150,000 units should be enough to meet the orders of online users. After all, e-commerce was still emerging. Most consumers still preferred to buy electronic products from brick-and-mortar stores. Although the price of the Fireflyer in brick-and-mortar stores was generally $30 higher than Amazon's in the past 3 months, it didn't hinder the enthusiasm of brick-and-mortar store users at all. Therefore, as time passed, at 10:52, when the transaction volume on the big screen exceeded 50,000 units, Jeff Bezos' original joy dissipated. He gradually calmed down and gradually realized that there might be a problem somewhere. On the surface, it seemed like a good thing that the Fireflyer had sold out in less than an hour. However, if the supply that they had prepared for a month was sold out in a day or even a few hours, then what could Amazon use to supply its customers? While Jeff Bezos was still trying to figure out what was going on, he jumped up and waved his arms, shouting at everyone in the conference room, "Stop! Hurry up and King stop! We can't sell it anymore." The sensation caused by the Spice Girls selection was beyond imagination, but Eric's days in London weren't affected. Naturally, he wouldn't waste his energy participating in the early stages of the selection. Simon Fuller was in charge of this work. He would only participate in the final stages of the selection process. Christina stayed in London for a week and returned to Los Angeles. Barry Weiss, the president of Firefly Records, hoped to take advantage of the popularity brought by Casino Royale to release another single for Christina to promote her debut album next year. Although Eric didn't have any substantial work plans in the near future, he didn't completely ignore the outside world. In addition to the North American summer box office, Eric continued to pay attention to the various affairs of Firefly, such as MGM's acquisition of E! Entertainment and Rainbow Media's equity acquisition, the 007 project team's salary negotiation with Brosnan, Chris's foreign exchange operations in Southeast Asia, the next phase of the Fireflyer sales plan, etc. He also took the time to go to Cambridge in North London and Nokia's headquarters in Finland to check on the progress of ARM's chip development and Nokia's operations. Although he was far away from North America and the women weren't around, his days were still fulfilling. Due to the time difference, it was still daytime in North America, but night had already fallen in London. Although the 007 series had long been incorporated by Hollywood, most of the British media still treated it as a British film. Therefore, perhaps because Casino Royale's reputation and box office in North America and even the world's film market both exploded, it aroused some of the British people's pride. The film's UK box office dropped even lower than North America's, only 33%. The box office was still as high as £14.27 million, which was equivalent to $21.4 million US. In 2 weeks, the UK box office of Casino Royale had reached £57 million, 36 million US. Based on the current box office trend, the film's final UK box office would exceed £60 million, 90 million US. Although it couldn't compare with the £93 million, 119 million US of Titanic, which was finally released last month, it would undoubtedly take second place in the UK box office history. A movie party was taking place in a private club in London's West End. It was hosted by the famous British working title film company. At the after-party of the London premiere of Casino Royale, Eric had met a female producer named Alison Owen from Working Title. After seeing Cate Blanchett's performance in Casino Royale, Alison Owen wanted to invite her to star in a film that the company was preparing. Since Cate had signed an option contract with Firefly in advance, she had to get Firefly's permission. Eric happened to be in London, so the script was sent to Eric. Coincidentally, the film turned out to be Elizabeth, a biopic about Queen Elizabeth I of England. Elizabeth was the first film that Cate Blanchett was nominated for an Oscar for Best Actress. Moreover, Elizabeth was released in the same year as Shakespeare's Love, and both were Oscar favorites. However, compared to Shakespeare's Love, which was controlled by Mike Mira, the result of Elizabeth could be imagined. Since it could be an Oscar favorite, Elizabeth naturally wouldn't be too bad. Cate Blanchett also liked the role, so Eric didn't object. The final result of the discussion was that the film would be co-financed by Working Title and New Line would be responsible for the global distribution of the film except for the United Kingdom. In the course of several communications around Elizabeth, Eric gradually became familiar with the person in charge of Working Title, so he attended the party today. Eric, I heard that you are recently selecting a band. Can you reveal in advance, what are you going to surprise everyone this time? In the crowded hall, Eric stood with a glass of red wine and chatted with the other 3 people. The president of Working Title Company, Eric Fina, asked. Yes, another Eric. In fact, in the West, there was really no creativity in naming. The probability of meeting someone with the same name in public was similar to the probability of meeting the same type of car when driving out. Since it is a surprise, of course, we have to wait until the last moment to know. However, I can reveal in advance. Eric had a smile on his face, and gradually lowered his voice to whet the appetite of the few people, and then said, "This is a girl group." The other 3 people were stunned, and then they laughed. 19 Entertainment's public recruitment information clearly stated that young girls between the ages of 18 and 23 were required, so it was naturally impossible for others. Eric Fina also shook his head with a smile and said, "So, Eric, Firefly is going to develop the record business in Europe, right?" Eric shook his head and said, "It's just some ideas now. I still plan to test the water first. After all, Firefly is not good in the music field." Actually, Eric Fina continued, the record industry is similar to the structure of Hollywood film companies. Firefly wants to expand in this field, and the method is very simple. Eric raised his eyebrows slightly when he heard what the other party said. Just now, everyone was still discussing the development of British film. Eric Fina suddenly changed the topic to the selection of the Spice Girl group. Eric already felt a little strange. At this time, he clearly felt that Eric Fina should be hinting at something. As he was thinking, there was a warm greeting next to him. "Hi, Eric, good evening." Eric turned around and saw Barbara Broccoli in a black evening dress walking over with a smile. He smiled and nodded in response, carefully holding the wine glass and hugging her. The British film industry was only so big. As the producer of the James Bond series, Barbara Broccoli's appearance here was not surprising. After hugging Eric, Barbara Broccoli nodded to the others and then asked, "So, what is everyone talking about?" Eric Fina replied with a smile, "Of course it's Casino Royale." "Barbara, you did really well this time." "Hey, Eric is here. If you say that, I'll be ashamed." "Haha." There was another burst of laughter. After chatting for a while, Barbara Broccoli noticed that there was no female companion beside Eric. She joked, "Eric, I didn't expect you to come alone tonight. Do you want me to dance with you?" Eric reached out his hand. "Of course, it would be my pleasure." Barbara Broccoli was just joking. Seeing Eric reach out his hand, she did not refuse. She handed the red wine in her hand to the waiter next to her, nodded to the others, and followed Eric to the dance floor. Feeling Eric's arm around her waist, Barbara Broccoli also put her arm over, but she whispered in Eric's ear, "First of all, Eric, even if you can't find a girl today, you can't provoke me." Accompanied by the music, Eric gently danced with Barbara Broccoli and said, "Barbara, what you said really hurts me." "Haha, I'm just giving you a heads up in advance. You're not my type." "Oh, it seems that I'm too handsome." "You like the rough type?" "No, you're too old. I like younger ones." "Alright, another one of my hearts is broken. However, if I remember correctly, you are more." Barbara Broccoli did not wait for Eric to finish and immediately interrupted, "Hey, Eric, don't be so rude." "Oh, sorry." Eric quickly stopped talking and said, "By the way, Barbara, I have something to ask you. Are you familiar with Eric Fina?" "It's okay. You know, the British Circle is only so big." "Then, do you know which record company he's related to?" Barbara Broccoli thought for a while, shook her head, and then seemed to understand something. She smiled and said, "I don't know which record company Eric Fina is related to, but Working Title is related to a record company. It's a big relationship." You're tuning in to the Narrate and Escape YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.